Chapter 1138. After transfusing all 4 bags of blood, Fongbujue felt much better. Even though there was still slight dizziness and nausea, it did not affect his movement anymore. He led Igor forward, and, along the way, they discovered many more sealed doors. Similar to the 4 doors from before, they were all locked and airtight metal doors. Without opening them, it was impossible to tell what was inside. This time, Fongbujue tried to pry open the lock. But in the end, when he poked the tool into the lock, he heard the system say cannot be opened. Since it was cannot be opened and not require key or locked, Brother Jew confirmed that none of these doors could be opened. They were merely decorations on the scenario map. However, this point caused him to have some doubts. The scenario map is so big, but the space for exploration is so limited, he said to himself as he walked. After exiting the gravity gate, there's only one room that can be entered, and that interrogation room has nothing related to the main plot. It is purely a place for the players to replenish their equipment. He lifted his head to look ahead. And this map that is so similar, it hasn't changed at all. It looks so monotonous and repetitive. Brother Phone, look, there's no road ahead. At this moment, Igor's eyes widened as he pointed to the front. Oh, is that so? Fongbujue could not see the end, but he did not express any objection because he knew that his eyesight was not as good as Igor's. After all, the latter was a cyborg. I can't see that far. Let's keep walking. Okay. Igor nodded and followed Brother Jew. Soon, the two reached the end of the corridor. There was nothing special there, and there was no room. There was only a gray wall that was similar to the rest of the corridor. Other than that, the end was not a dead end. There were forks on both sides. In other words, this was a T-junction. Fongbujue stood at the junction and looked left and right. He realized that the scenery on both sides was basically the same. Other than the details like the texture of the walls and floor that were hard for others to notice, or rather, they would not be able to remember them even if they noticed them, they were still the same corridors, the same chandelier, and the same metallic door. Oomph! What is this? At this moment, Brother Jew finally realized what the strange feeling this script gave him was. That was a kind of crude feeling. To be more specific, other than the rooms that could be entered, the whole scenario revealed a problem, a lack of details. First of all, as mentioned earlier, it was one thing for such a large base to be built similarly everywhere, but under this premise, it was illogical to not have a single road sign. Secondly, it wasn't just the road signs. There were also many details that should have existed that didn't exist. For example, electrical wires and pipes. The chandelier on the ceiling of the corridor was designed to be hung by a single wire, and the end of the wire was directly connected to the ceiling. But in the corridor, there was not a single light switch. This meant that there were 2 conclusions. 1. As long as there was electricity in the base, the lights in the corridor would be on and would never be turned off. 2. The switches for the lights were gathered at some kind of control center. The possibility of the latter was close to 0. The technology of the 1940s might not have been able to do that, but even if it could, in this base that had no signs, no surveillance, and no way to differentiate between different areas, how would the controller know which area they were controlling? For example, if I gave you a remote control and told you that you could use it to control all the lights in a certain building, but I wouldn't tell you which switch was for which floor, and you wouldn't be able to see the building, then what was the point of controlling the lights? Of course, this could be explained by the fact that the lights in the corridor were never turned off, so Fongbujue did not dwell on it too much. But there was one last problem that Brother Jew could not accept. If there were no exposed wires and pipes, he would have treated it as if the whole base was wired, but there was not even a single air vent. What was going on? This was an underground base. Even if it was not completely sealed, there had to be air vents, and there had to be plenty of them. Initially, Fongbujue thought that he would be able to see a few if he expanded his exploration range. But along the way, he did not see even one. At that moment, after Brother Jew confirmed the lack of details characteristic, he realized that there was something wrong with this scenario map itself. The base did not look like something created by Thriller Paradise, but more like something created in Minecraft. In fact, even in Minecraft, it was possible to create a building that was more complicated than this, then the hidden worldview should be related to this scenario map, right? Feng Buju wondered. Could it be this place is similar to the sandbox created by the anomalies? And it's not even ready yet? Pa 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 pa. Just as Brother Ju was thinking, a series of hurried footsteps came from his side. Be careful. It's him. Igor's sight and hearing were both better than Feng Bujua, so his reaction was faster than the latter. Oh! However, Feng Bujua's calmness was not something that Igor could match. After being reminded, Brother Ju stopped thinking. He stared with his dead fish eyes and said listlessly, "The one with the bare feet, right?" Just from the sound of the footsteps, they knew that the person was not wearing shoes. Furthermore, Igor said, "It's him," so this meant that the person was someone that they had met before. Based on these 2 points, it was clear who the person was. Keek, keek, keek. At that moment, the barefoot man was laughing weirdly as he rushed over from several meters away. He was at least 3 times faster than the one with shoes. Igor. Feng Bujue used a calm tone to call the captain of the Soviet team next to him. Yes. When he answered, Igor had already put down the toolbox and gripped the cleaver in his hand tightly. Same old rules, you know, Brother Ju said. Okay. With his previous experience, Igor was no longer afraid of these so-called demons. With the premise of abandoning fear, his combat ability had become stronger, and his attacks were faster and more accurate. Chi! 2 seconds later, there was the sound of wind being cut, and the cleaver was aimed at the barefoot man's neck. The same scenario, the same result. The world in the eyes of the monsters was different from normal humans. For example, when Feng Bujua looked at Thriller Paradise through the data perspective, it was completely different from the normal perspective. Translator, WQL editor. Alim in the eyes of the barefoot man. The corridor was a dark space. All the landforms and objects were shadows, while all the light sources were hazy and cold. The only bright color in his eyes was red, the red of blood. From his perspective, Feng Bujue was a human silhouette that radiated the color of blood, and Igor, including the clothes on Igor's body and the cleaver in his hand, they all melted into the surrounding darkness. Therefore, when the barefoot man realized that the cleaver was coming, he was already unable to stop and evade the attack. Air. The laughter stopped abruptly because of the cleaver in the neck, and the head flew forward due to inertia. 2 seconds later, Feng Bujue caught the barefoot man's head and said, this is a familiar scene. How is this possible? The barefoot man was undoubtedly able to speak normally with only his head left. Okay, let's make this short. Feng Bujue looked at the barefoot man and said, "If you don't cooperate, I will place your head somewhere that will not be discovered for decades. If you cooperate, I will kill you in a moment. Do you understand?" Hearing that, the barefoot man was stunned for a few seconds before he replied, understood. How'd you find me? Feng Bujue did not say we but I because he knew that the barefoot man could not see Igor, and he did not want to expose this. I can sense the blood flow in a living person's body. The barefoot man replied, "If you are far away, it is blurry, but the closer you are, the clearer it becomes." Oh, Feng Bujue raised his eyebrows. Then, in the operating room, why didn't you discover me? What operating room? The barefoot man could not see any details of the scene. He could only see light and shadows, so he did not know which room he had entered was the operating room. Other than that, it was also because of this that he was not affected by SCP-1011. All I know is, I felt that there was someone nearby in a certain area, but I couldn't find him even after searching for a long time. After a few seconds, Barefoot continued, then, I guess that the person might not be on this floor, but one of the floors above or below, so I left. Wait. When Feng Bujue heard this, his expression changed. This base has more than one floor. Yes, there are 4 floors. 1 floor above ground and 3 underground. We are currently on the 2nd underground floor, the barefoot man replied. You've been to all 4 floors. Brother Bujue asked, Do you know how to get out? No. The barefoot man showed a complicated expression. In my memory, this base has 4 floors, but now I can't find the exit. Why do you have that kind of memory? Feng Bujue asked again. The 5 people who participated in the experiment were all war criminals, so there was no reason for them to know the structure of this base. War criminals? The barefoot man was stunned. You mean the first experiment? These 5 words were like the first torrent that broke through a dam, causing Feng Bujue's thoughts to spread like wildfire. I say, after 2 seconds of silence, Feng Bujue asked in a low voice, how many sleep experiments were conducted here? 3, the barefoot man replied. Can you take me to the experiment records? Feng Bujue asked again. This question made the barefoot man hesitate for a moment. No, the world in my eyes is different from the world you see. Although I remember the way, I don't know where I am at this moment. Then I'll give you a fixed coordinate. Can you find a way based on your memory? Feng Bujue asked again. Fixed coordinate? The barefoot man did not seem to understand what Brother Bujue meant. Very simple, Feng Bujue replied. For example, he turned to look at the side of the T-junction. If I take you to a corner on this floor, can you tell me how many intersections we have to pass from that corner and how many doors we have to stop at to find the experiment report? The barefoot man understood this time, but he replied, I can, but why don't you find it yourself? Isn't there a sign in the corridor? What did you say? Feng Bujue's expression changed abruptly. The barefoot man thought that Zhang Heng did not hear him clearly, so he said, There's a sign on the road. Can't you read it? The next second, Feng Bujue immediately turned his head and looked at Igor. Is there one? Igor froze for a moment, then shook his head. Then, Feng Bujue looked at the barefoot man again. In your memory, this base, is there a sign? Of course there is. The barefoot man replied in a matter-of-fact tone. This base is built like a chessboard. The passages are all straight and intertwined vertically. If there is no sign, who can tell where they are? Then in your memory, Feng Bujue continued to ask, is there a light switch on the wall of the corridor? And is there a vent in the corridor? What the hell are you talking about? This time, the barefoot man asked, what happened in this base? Judging from his tone, the answer was obvious, yes. However, the reality was that Brother Ju did not see any of these things. For a few seconds, Feng Bujue thought that his vision or mental state was affected, causing him to be unable to see those details. But Igor also said that there was no such thing, which meant that it was not a problem in that regard. This is getting weirder and weirder, Feng Bujue thought to himself. Could it be that Igor is also a figment of my imagination? He quickly rejected that hypothesis. Impossible. He has to be real. I've had physical contact with him, and he helped me carry the blood collection bags. He carried the toolbox along the way, and he even killed 2 monsters. If Igor is an illusion, then everything in this scenario so far has been illusion, hasn't it? With that in mind, Brother Ju had a flash of inspiration. Wait a minute, illusion? He could not help but mumble softly. Lack of details. There are details in the NPC's memory. It is not a visual or mental interference. Illusory. There is a problem with this scenario itself. It is like a sandbox that has not been made properly. Sandbox, not made properly. A series of information fragments flashed through Feng Bujue's mind, and in a very short amount of time, they spread out like water in a sponge, giving rise to many hypotheses and hypotheses. Finally, at the end of the inference map, there was an area that slowly became clearer. At that moment, Feng Bujue revealed a confident smile that he had not seen in a long time. It is not that it has not been made properly, but that is the best it can do. He raised his eyes to look into the distance, and his focus appeared to be on the back of the corridor. What the anomalies can do, the NPCs can do as well. Since Origin can create a sandbox, then the SCP Foundation. Chapter 1139. About 20 minutes later, Feng Bujue came to the corner of the base with Barefoot's head. Igor still walked in front of him with a weapon and some tools, acting as a bodyguard and pathfinder. Okay, we've reached the corner. From here, how do we get to the room where the experiment report is stored? Feng Bujue asked Barefoot after he stood still. I'll make it clear in advance. Barefoot replied. Because you said that you can't see the sign, I can't confirm which of the four corners of the base this corner is. So, the destination may not be the right one. It's okay. Feng Bujue said, if this is wrong, we'll just go to another corner. It'll just take more time. He paused for a moment. But, I'll also make it clear in advance. He cast a cold gaze at Barefoot. It doesn't matter if we go to the wrong room, but if we're led to some strange place later, such as a trap or a place where your kind is, then you'll have to pray for yourself afterward. This sentence made Barefoot's expression change. Indeed, Barefoot had a similar idea on the way here, and he was just about to put it into action. However, Feng Bujue gave him a warning in advance. I've already seen through your little trick. If you dare to use it, you'll have to think about the consequences. Oomph. After a few seconds of hesitation, Barefoot had no choice but to compromise. He snorted and said, then I'll also make it clear in advance. The room where the experiment report is stored is very close to the room where we held this ceremony. Although we've dispersed to different parts of the base after the ceremony, I can't be sure if there's anyone else nearby. He paused for half a second. So, if you meet my kind on the way, or if you're attacked near that room, don't say that I'm deliberately leading you into a trap. These words showed that the monster had already made his bottom line clear. 2 seconds later, Feng Bujue replied with a blank expression. Okay, tell me. How do we get there? The corridor was straight and bright. There were basically no obstacles, so Brother Bujue and Igor walked very quickly. After walking for about 12 minutes, they arrived at the destination that Barefoot had told them about. We didn't meet anything along the way. Feng Bujue stood at the door of the room. Maybe this is the wrong place? His reasoning was not wrong, because when he tried to open the door, the prompt he got was, can't open. So, they could only choose to set off to another corner to relocate their coordinates. This process would have taken about half an hour, and this was on the basis that they did not encounter any monsters or other incidents along the way. But they were lucky. After walking straight to the other side of the base for 7 or 8 minutes, Barefoot suddenly said, wait, I found a room of the ritual room. Oh, hearing that, Feng Bujue stopped moving and lowered his head to ask, which one? It's at the fork we passed just now. Turn left. There's a lot of blood in that ritual room. Although it's no longer flowing, I can still feel it from this distance. After Brother Bujue heard this, he immediately gave Igor a look. The latter understood and went into a state of alert, holding his sword. The two retreated a few meters and turned in the direction that Barefoot said. At this time, Igor looked focused and moved his feet quietly. It was obvious that this was not the first time he had experienced this kind of situation. Although Igor was not a professional soldier, he did fight in wars and had quite a lot of combat experience. In 1942, in the cold winter full of death and covered in ice and snow, the Soviets, Romanians, Hungarians, Germans gathered in a place called Stalingrad. They used their blood to write a very important chapter in the history of human war. For the Soviets, Stalingrad was a place they absolutely did not want to lose. This city not only had an irreplaceable symbolic meaning, but more importantly, it was the traffic throat of the central area of the Soviet Union to the important economic areas in the south. It was north of Moscow, south of the Persian Gulf, and south of the Soviet Union's main food, coal, and oil production areas. If they lost here, they would probably lose the whole war. Perhaps the whole history of human beings would be rewritten because of this. On July 28th of the same year, Stalin issued the famous Order Number 227, Don't Take a Step Back, and Igor was one of the members of the Soviet army who received this order. He was only 19 years old that year. He did not want to go to the battlefield. He only wanted to be a worker or a shoemaker like his dead father. He hoped to live a stable life. He hoped to be in love like a normal young man. He hoped to be filial to his sick mother, and he hoped to feed his starving sister every day. However, the war left him with no other choice. Stalingrad in October was known as the furnace of murder. Igor stayed in this furnace until the end of the war. As a new recruit who hadn't received much military training, this could be said to be a miracle. The next spring, Igor was forced to retire from the army because of an injury and amputation. When he returned home, His mother and sister were already dead, and the already poor house was left with only 4 walls. He was only 20 years old, but he became a crippled, homeless man. In this way, 7 years passed by in a hurry. These should have been the best 7 years of his life, but for him, every day felt like a year. Until one day, some people in military uniforms came to tell him that he was selected by the government to receive a free treatment program. At that time, Igor, who was already terminally ill, naturally had no reason to refuse. But what he did not expect was that he was not there to receive any treatment, but to be an experimental subject. Don't be so careful. Barefoot's sudden words broke the brief silence. There won't be an ambush in the room. How do you know? Fong Bujua looked at him. You shouldn't be able to perceive each other's location, right? If those monsters could perceive each other, they would not have to worry about being beheaded and left somewhere undiscovered. So, this inference must be correct. Because we won't stay in one place and not move, Barefoot responded. Calm. Waiting, these make us crazy. Well, it's a valid reason, Fong Bujua said and winked at Igor again. Igor, who was already standing in front of the door, reached out and pushed the metal door panel. Squeak! The sound of the metal shaft turning made people's hair stand on end. Behind the open door, the smell of blood wafted out. Igor's sense of smell had also become very sensitive, so standing there made him feel quite uncomfortable. At this time, Fong Bujua stepped forward and took the lead in entering the room before Igor. Here, let me do it. He was so confident because he had already confirmed that there were no monsters in the room when he stood behind Igor. The room wasn't very big, covering an area of about 30 square meters. The lights in the room were switched on, so the room was clear at a glance. Opposite the door, there was a cement table that couldn't be moved. The table was just big enough for a person to lie down on. At this moment, the cement table looked like a chopping board that had been used many times but had never been cleaned. Layers of blood stains of varying depths covered its surface. It was also mixed with flesh, viscera fragments, hair, broken bones, and many other indistinguishable things. After standing in the room and looking around, Fong Bujua picked up Barefoot's head and looked directly at him. Explain the principle of the ritual. We can cut people open without letting them shed a drop of blood. Barefoot answered with a lot of information. Brother Barefoot's answer contained a lot of information. It can also make people bleed out without any wounds. As he spoke, he glanced at the surface of the cement table. Under the blood stains, there's a ritual circle. It was drawn by the Whisperer. Only he knows how to use power. Whisperer? Fong Bujua asked in a probing tone, motioning for a more detailed explanation. I don't know what he is. All I have in my mind is the name Whisper, just like how I know how to walk, Barefoot answered. Barefoot continued. He looks no different from us, but he seems to know more than we do. Can the ritual only be carried out when the Whisperer is present? Fong Bujua asked again. No, as long as the circle is drawn, anyone can complete it. Barefoot had just said the word complete when he felt that something was wrong. Hey, what are you doing? Fong Bujua ignored him. He just took 2 steps forward and used Barefoot's face to wipe the ritual table as if nothing had happened. A few seconds later, he used a series of rough movements to wipe away a large part of the blood stains, revealing the circle. Oh, King Solomon's spell system. Fong Bujua stared at the circle for a few seconds and muttered to himself. Bastard, what are you doing? The next second, Barefoot, whose face was smeared with filth, shouted angrily. Fong Bujua ignored his complaints and silently engraved the circle in his mind. Then he said in a calm tone, Okay, bring us to the room where the experiment report is. Since you know that it's not far from here, it shouldn't be a problem to locate it from here, right? Damn it. Barefoot was furious, but there was nothing he could do. He had already fallen into the hands of others. Moreover, on the way here, Fong Bujua had already told him how he dealt with the monster from before. Barefoot did not want to end up like him, or even worse. Therefore, he could only continue to swallow his anger and obediently point the way for Brother Bujua and the others. After coming out of the ritual room, they turned right, passed through 2 crossroads, and turned left. The first room was the archive room. The door here was also locked. When Feng Bujue tried to pick the lock, he received a special system prompt. This lock is rusty. Even with the key, it can't be opened. Brute force seems to be a better choice. The prompt is quite clear. When the voice sounded in his ear, Feng Bujue calculated in his heart. But without Igor's help, how can a player open it alone? Even though he had a set of ready-made solutions, he would still think about such problems. That way, he would be able to gather more information. About 5 seconds later, Feng Bujue came up with 3 possible ways to open the door. 1. Lure a monster. Use the monster's movement and borrow the monster's strength to open the door. The possibility of this hypothesis was the lowest because it was too difficult to implement. Of course, it was not completely impossible because the monster's vision was very limited. They usually had to walk very close to the door before they could find it. Furthermore, if the player ran at full speed, their speed would not be much slower than the monster's. Originally, the scenario was designed to allow the player to escape by using the maze-like terrain and the monster's vision. Therefore, Brother Bujue still considered this as one of the possibilities. 2. Borrow the power of an NPC to open the door. This NPC naturally did not refer to a hidden reward like Igor, but a character that had a certain connection to the main plot. Perhaps there was someone among the monsters that could be negotiated with, like the Whisperer or one of the victims who had been transformed by the ritual. However, Brother Bujue could not verify that for now. 3. And the possibility with the highest probability was for the player to kick the door open. Feng Bujue gave this possibility a try. Without saying a word, he used a roundhouse kick to kick the door lock. When kicking a door, side kicks and roundhouse kicks are more efficient than kicking the door from the front. Most movies and TV shows use a roundhouse kick to kick the door from the front, which is not scientific. But the door didn't budge. At that moment, Feng Bujue came to another conclusion. Assuming that of the 3 options, the probability of the first one was too low to be feasible, and the probability of the second one did not exist, and considering only the 3rd option, as long as one of the prerequisites was met, the plan could be realized. And that prerequisites were for the player to inject himself with VNO 9 and successfully mutate. Igor. After thinking for a moment, Feng Bujue said, "Here, I'll have to trouble you." Brother Ju still had no intention of implementing the conclusion generated by multiple hypotheses, but after thinking about it, he had more confidence that VNO 9 could be successfully used on the player. Simply put, because there was more information available, the theoretical probability of this had increased. Okay, no problem. Igor did not know what Brother Ju was thinking. He merely nodded and then took 3 steps forward and kicked the door from the side. Bang! Igor's first kick was just a test to see how it felt, so he did not use his full strength. However, even he didn't expect that this kick would directly kick open the heavy metal door. Even a piece of the wall beside the door lock was broken. Chapter 1140. Igor's surprise did not last long. He was getting more and more used to his power. After breaking the door, he stood at the door and scanned the room with his eyes that could see in the dark. He then turned to Brother Ju and said, "There's no one inside, at least I don't see anyone." "Okay." Feng Bujue nodded at him and walked forward. He took the lead and entered the room. Based on his experience, Brother Ju found the light switch on the wall on the left side of the door. When the light was turned on, the whole picture of the archive room was revealed to Feng Bujue. It was a space of only about 10 square meters. Other than the area near the door, there was a circle of filing cabinets along the wall. In a sense, this room was indeed a trap. It was a trap that made Feng Bujue, who was a reader, waste a lot of time. Fortunately, the system had made some adjustments to this. Can't open it. There's nothing valuable in it. The files are stained, and the handwriting is difficult to distinguish. Similar system notifications continued to ring out for the next 10 minutes or so. Feng Bujue tried to open every drawer of the filing cabinets, and the prompts he got were basically the same as the above 3. He was not surprised by this. In fact, he was more than happy to see this. Otherwise, with his personality and habits, He might have spent a few hours here looking at a bunch of documents that might have nothing to do with the main plot. Hey, I say, you're the experimental subject, E107, aren't you? At this time, Brother Jew had already handed Barefoot over to Igor. While Brother Jew was flipping through the files, Barefoot whispered to Igor, "Looks like VNO9 succeeded. You seem to know a lot." Igor's tone was cold, completely unlike the way he spoke to Brother Jew. Obviously, Igor did not have a good impression of the owner of the head in his hand. Even if Barefoot was not a devil, he was a member of an organization that used Igor as a guinea pig. This could be deduced from his knowledge of the base's structure. He. Trust me, I don't know much. Barefoot was not bothered by Igor's indifferent tone. Instead, he smiled and said, "Yes, I was a staff member of this base, but I'm just a nobody. Believe me, I hate the people in this base as much as you do." "Because they treated you as an experimental subject?" Igor asked tentatively. Oomph. Barefoot seemed to have recalled some unpleasant memories, and there was a hint of resentment in his tone. When a second experiment had an accident, they did not hesitate to seal off the area around the experiment area and trapped me and more than 10 other people there. He paused and looked up at Igor. Although the other party was just a tall shadow in his line of sight, he still gave him a sinister look. "But from the looks of it, what happened to you and me was a blessing in disguise." Just as he let out that creepy laugh, Fong Bujue had already gone through all the filing cabinets and confirmed that there was only one filing cabinet that could be opened, and in that filing cabinet, only the documents in one drawer could be identified. As for all the other cabinets and all the drawers, they were all either unopenable or unreadable. Okay, it seems that's it. Fong Bujue returned to the drawer, took out all the documents inside, and sat cross-legged on the ground. "Oh, right." After sitting down, Fong Bujue opened the first stack of documents and said to Igor without raising his head, "Igor, close the door." Igor heard this and turned to look at the metal door with the broken lock. He wondered, this door, is there any point in closing it? It's relatively safer to close it. Fong Bujue was already multitasking at this time. While reading the contents of the documents, he responded, "In case other mutants pass by the door, if the door is closed, they're likely to pass by without knowing." When Igor heard this, he instinctively looked down at the head in his hand. But what if this guy immediately screams when he hears footsteps outside? This was indeed a problem because Barefoot did not need a vocal organ to speak. Unless he was killed, it would be useless to pull out his tongue. He could still send messages to the people outside. "Then you throw his head at me immediately." The next second, Fong Bujue came up with a countermeasure almost without hesitation. When his kind hear the sound and come in from the door, they will only see him and me. Their attention will definitely be attracted to me. At that time, you can do it. Oomph. Unexpectedly, Barefoot sneered and said, "Even so, I can still remind them to be wary of Igor through words, can't I? You can try. When the time comes, your voice will be louder, or my folk song will be smoother." Fong Bujue replied calmly, "Taking a step back, even if your reminder really works, the result will be the same. According to my observation, with Igor's current physical ability, coupled with his invisible characteristic in your eyes, even if you are prepared, you are still no match for him." After listening to Brother Bujue's words, Barefoot snorted gloomily and was speechless. Barefoot, who had personally suffered a blow from Igor, understood that Fong Bujue's analysis was correct. Take himself as an example. Even if Barefoot had hands and feet now and was on guard, he had no confidence in defeating Igor. Putting aside the other miscellaneous enhancements, Igor, a VNO9 transformed human, was almost on par with the sleep experiment mutants like them. On this premise, Igor also had stealth and self-healing abilities that they did not have. To sum up, as long as Igor was a little more cautious and wretched in battle, he might not lose even if he fought one against 3. Creak. A few seconds later, Igor had gone to close the door. When he saw Fong Bujue flipping through a stack of documents attentively, he knew that it would take a lot of time. So, he also found an empty place to sit down and take a break. At the same time, Phone Bujue had already read 1/3 of the content of the first document with his amazing reading speed. Well, this group of people, although he had only read 1/3 of the document, Brother Jew had already begun to complain in his heart. Can you be any more ridiculous? The first document he read was an application for a research project, codenamed the Meli Yawa Project. The general idea of this project was to use sophisticated means to oppress and damage the right brain of human beings, so as to achieve the goal of making the left brain more developed. For some reason, the person who proposed this project thought that the left brain was more useful than the right brain. Then, this person had another theory, and that was the incomplete induced evolution theory. And the examples he gave seemed to be quite plausible. For example, blind people's hearing would be more developed than ordinary people's. People with a disabled left leg would have a stronger right leg. Deaf and mute people's vision would be relatively sharp, and a bachelor's arm would be thicker. Well, I just wrote this one casually, and so on. In short, the logic of this research project was that as long as the right brain was disabled, the left brain would be stronger. Before Phone Bujue finished reading the document, he had a strong feeling that the person who proposed this project might be disabled. Although I know that Germany during World War II, the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and the United States during any period were doing strange research. When Phone Bujue finished reading the first document, he whispered softly, "But this kind of setting is really amazing. I suddenly feel like the zombie is becoming more and more reliable." 3 minutes later, Brother Jew began to read the second document. This one was indeed more reliable, because this was the experimental record of the first sleep experiment. The content at the beginning was the same as the introduction in the opening cinematic, so Phone Bujue glanced at the section. They had enough food to last for a month, some books, running water, toilets, and a few beds, and continued reading. In the first 5 days, nothing unusual happened. However, the dialogue between the prisoners became more and more emotional. They began to confide in each other. On the 6th day, the situation took a turn for the worse. The prisoners suddenly became paranoid and crazy. They stopped chatting and began to blame each other for the current situation. In the next few days, the prisoners sat back to back as if they were angry. Through the microphone, we heard strange, muffled murmurs. On the 9th day, one of the prisoners panicked. He screamed and ran back and forth in the room. He kept shouting until he lost his voice. In the end, he could only make a weak whimper. The other 4 prisoners seemed to be unmoved by what was happening in the room, but 2 of them were observed quietly tearing paper from a book and excreting on the paper. They then stuck the paper to the glass porthole in the room. On the 14th day, we could no longer see what was happening in the room. The porthole looked like a big fish tank covered in excrement. On the 15th day, there was no sound in the room. It became very quiet, but the oxygen detector showed that there were still signs of life in the room. Although we couldn't see what was happening in the room, this abnormal silence made us wonder if they had fainted. At 11:30 that night, we unanimously decided to open the room for inspection. We told them through the broadcast that a team of staff would enter the room to check the microphone and clean the porthole. We asked the experimental subject to stay away from the door and lie on the ground. Otherwise, they would be shot. Of course, considering the mental and physical condition of these people, we couldn't rule out the possibility that some of them would take the initiative to die. Therefore, we declared that as long as they were willing to cooperate, one of them would be released. After the broadcast, the dead silence in the room continued until a trembling voice said into the microphone, "We don't need you to give us freedom anymore." 15 minutes later, we entered the room with a team of assault soldiers. What greeted us was a scene of purgatory. They didn't eat the food we gave them. At least, they haven't eaten for a week. We saw blood seeping out of their mouths. Everyone's mouth was stuffed with something. If I'm not mistaken, it should be their own flesh. We noticed that the muscles on everyone's face and body were greatly damaged, and these wounds were made by their bare hands and not teeth. In other words, they tore themselves apart with their hands and ate them as food. 2 of the experimental subjects had a lot of flesh torn apart. Their chests were exposed, and part of their internal organs had been dug out. However, their bodies were still functioning normally. I don't know how this works, but a person with half a lung missing can still speak. Before this, he was still alive. We had to stop the experiment and enter the medical treatment process. However, after turning off the TS gas, the 5 experimental subjects suddenly went berserk. They used a strange power that I couldn't understand to launch a surprise attack on us. They killed 3 guards in an instant and killed 2 more people while the others were subduing them. In the end, we managed to subdue 3 of the experimental subjects, and the other 2 can be dissected directly. On the morning of the 16th day, we dissected the first one. He was the one who started screaming at the beginning. We now know why he stopped screaming after that. His vocal cords were completely torn apart. Also, part of the flesh stuffed in his mouth didn't seem to be his own. It seemed to be the sinus of another experimental subject. Reading up to this point, Fong Bujua noticed that the person who wrote the experiment records was becoming more and more emotional and dramatic. Moreover, when he was describing the experimental subjects, he was no longer describing the feelings of humans. It was more like he was describing something. At the same time, the 3 people we tied up are undergoing different degrees of surgery. They all requested that no anesthesia be used during the surgery to keep them awake. Actually, it wouldn't have mattered even if they hadn't made such a request. We've already discovered that tranquilizers have no effect on them. Even if we injected 3 doses of tranquilizers into one of them, the experimental subjects would still be alive and kicking. The first subject who underwent the surgery died of excessive blood loss. At least from the symptoms, it was excessive blood loss. As for why he was still so strong despite having 9 broken bones, we have no idea. The second experimental subject showed a strange satisfaction during the surgery. He was like a drug addict, smiling at us the whole time. However, after the surgery, he got angry and asked us to cut him open again. The third experimental subject kept nagging that he had to stay awake. From his words, I vaguely heard that he seemed to be saying that he was going to be free soon. Chapter 1141. As much as we wanted to complete the experiment, the last 2 test subjects were not sent back to their cells. One of them fell asleep after the operation. I believe that was the effect of the previous sedative, or perhaps it was because he had not been exposed to TS gas for a long time. In any case, he died quickly after he fell asleep. It was as if sleep had caused him to lose his abnormal bodily functions. The remaining test subject became extremely agitated after he heard about the death of his partner, and he went berserk again. He grabbed the guard's gun and killed 2 of my colleagues. He threatened us to send him back to the room and release the gas again. At that time, Professor Andre ambushed the test subject from behind and pointed the gun at its head. He asked, "What are you people?" Fong Bujua had heard the next part of the record before, and it matched the description of the monster that was killed by Igor. The rest of the document was some photos and autopsy records. Brother Ju looked through them and did not find anything of value. Basically, that was the record of the first sleep experiment. Even though there were some differences in the details and the narrative angle was different, overall, it was similar to the Soviet sleep experiment that Fong Bujua knew. One thing worth noting was the record mentioned the so-called TS gas. This was the first time that Brother Ju had come across this term. In the various versions of the story that he knew, they all mentioned a kind of gas that could keep people excited, but none of the versions mentioned what it was. However, in this thriller paradise scenario, the system gave the gas a specific name. Other than that, near the end of the record, there was a mention of Professor Andre. This person's name was the same as the person who escaped from the first-person perspective in the cinematic. Brother Ju believed that there was a high chance that they were the same person. From the cinematic's plot and the information that they knew so far, something must have happened to Professor Andre during the last 2 experiments. Nicole, when he opened the 3rd file, Fong Bujua asked Barefoot, "Do you know a Dr. Andre?" On the way here, Brother Ju had already confirmed Barefoot's name. This guy's real name was Nicholas. Dr. Andre? Nicholas's expression changed when he heard the name. Why? Did you see any interesting records? Fong Bujua continued unhurriedly. If you dare to answer my question with a question again, I will throw you into the manure pipe. Niguli pursed his lips and confessed helplessly, Professor Andre is a whisper. He paused. He and I are both survivors of the second experimental accident. Oh. Phone Bouguer responded and then began to browse the third file, the second sleep experiment. The panic effect caused by the failure of the previous experiment has not subsided, but under Dr. Andre's insistence, we began the second experiment. The experimental specimens and experimental methods used in this experiment will be adjusted so that we can obtain more diverse data. We chose 15 prisoners ranging from 30 to 60 years old who are facing the death penalty. All the subjects are male. The experiment will be carried out in groups. The first group has 5 people, the same number as the first experiment. The second group has 3 people. The third and fourth groups have 2 people each. The remaining 3 are held separately in groups 5, 6, and 7. The supplies provided in the cells are as usual, which is food, some books, running water, toilets, and beds that can last for a month. Based on the previous experience, the cells selected for this experiment are equipped with high portholes to prevent the experimental subjects from blocking them. The prisoners were told that as long as they can stay awake for 30 days, they will be exempted from the death penalty and will receive a handsome reward. The experiment has begun. TS gas has begun to be released. The first 5 days, everything was normal. This time, the prisoners were generally less educated, and they were more wary of each other. Almost no one read books, and no one was willing to talk. On the 8th day, a fight broke out in Group 1. Although we immediately intervened to stop it, one of the prisoners died on the spot. The other 4 suffered different degrees of injuries, but it was not to the extent that they needed surgery. On the 9th day, the experimental subject of Group 7 committed suicide. He used all his strength to slam into the corner of the metal bed frame. His skull was crushed on the spot, and there was no time to save him. On the 10th day, the 3 people of Group 2 gathered under the porthole and looked up without saying a word. Although the room was equipped with one-way glass, according to the observer, their eyes were fixed on us and moved with us as if they could see through the glass. On the 11th day, the experimental subject of Group 6 covered his head and hid under the bed. In a pleading tone, he kept repeating the short sentence, "Don't come over." At the same time, a second fight broke out in Group 1. This time, we did not go in to stop it, because everything happened too quickly. By the time the observer realized it, the 2 survivors had already started to devour the bodies of the 2 dead. On the 12th day, the members of Group 3, 4, and 5, whose conditions were more stable, stopped eating and started to draw on the wall with their excrement. The content they drew seemed to be some kind of pattern with special words. This part of the content has been handed over to the Theology and Linguistics Department for research. Below this record, there were several pictures attached. Without a doubt, they were the things that the experimental subjects drew when they painted the wall with their excrement. It really is from the King Solomon School. Phone Bouguer stared at the excrement for a few seconds, and surprisingly, he understood the meaning of one of the pictures. The combination of words on this picture. It means to summon something from the other side. On the 15th day, the remaining 2 people of Group 1 started to throw excrement at the porthole, but due to the design of the porthole, their action had little effect. On the 17th day, the experimental subject of Group 6 tried to commit suicide by slamming into the wall. After we entered the room to subdue him, he lost all his strength in the struggle and died quickly. Before he died, he showed a very relieved expression. So far, it could be seen that this record and the record of the first sleep experiment were written by the same person, and the typewriter used was the same. But from the next paragraph onwards, the recorder had changed. This could be seen from the tone of the recording, the words used, and the way the sentences were written. Phone Bouguer was a writer, after all, so he was quite confident about this assumption. On the 20th day, one of the people of Group 2 said into the microphone, "It's time." Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation after the experimental from Group 2 said that all the cells started to behave strangely. The 2 experimentals from Group 1 smashed open the metal door with great force and escaped from the cell. The experimentals from Group 3, 4, and 5 used some kind of method to create an unknown cover on the surface of the porthole. Their subsequent actions are unknown. The 3 experimental subjects of Group 2 jumped out from the room, broke through the bulletproof porthole, and invaded the observation room. The last sound we heard on the walkie-talkie was a scream and a strange tearing sound, and then the communication was cut off. After consulting with the higher-ups, we sealed off the entire experimental area and waited for reinforcements. 6 hours later, the cleanup team armed with flamethrowers began to clean up the area. At this time, all the experimental subjects we encountered had become creatures that were obviously different from humans. This description was accompanied by a few photos. Although the photos only showed a few burned corpses, it was obvious that the owners of the corpses had become the same mutants as the barefoot guy. We found 5 survivors: Dr. Andre, Dr. Josh, the researcher Nicholas, and 2 guards, Alexander and Yakov. They were all attacked by the experimental subjects, but they were not killed. According to Dr. Andre, the experimental subjects seemed to want to take them to complete some kind of ritual, but they were interrupted. For the treatment plan and interrogation records of these 5 people, see document -6387. After this paragraph, there was an appendix. The appendix was still full of all kinds of strange and scary photos and a lot of miscellaneous items, such as the list of all the casualties and so on. And for these, Phone Bujue also read them without missing a word. At this point, the record of the second experiment was announced. Brother Jew's mind had basically outlined the entire process of the incident. Nicholas. 2 seconds later, Phone Bujue looked at Nicholas again and said, "The third experiment was carried out on the 5 of you, the survivors of the second experiment accident, right?" "Yes," Nicholas replied. "I don't know why, but the bureaucrats in charge were paranoid that we had been infected by some kind of infection. They didn't dare to let us go back to work, and they felt that it would be a pity to kill us, so—" He didn't finish his sentence, but the meaning was clear. Brother Jew muttered, and with a thoughtful expression, he picked up the 4th file. Then, at this moment, thump, 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 a series of very obvious, heavy footsteps came from the corridor outside. Ha. Looks like I'm in luck. Nicholas couldn't help but laugh out loud almost at the moment when he heard the footsteps. "Shut up." Igor lowered his voice and shouted at the head beside him. It doesn't matter," Nicholas interrupted. "If it were someone else, maybe I'd listen to you, but this time it's the whispers. You're dead meat." Ha. He suddenly laughed out loud, and at this volume, the person outside must have heard it. "Give me the head, and stay away from the door." Seeing this, Phone Bujue immediately pocketed the remaining documents that he had not read. He stood up and said to Igor, "Thank you, Igor." Igor followed Brother Jew's orders without question, so he quickly did as he was told. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps came quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it reached the door and stopped as expected. What happened next was a little scary. A huge hand reached in from outside the door, grabbed the edge of the door, and then, squeak woo quong, the big hand tore the whole metal door from the door frame, like tearing the wrapping paper on a small box of yogurt, and threw it into the corridor. Then, in front of Phone Bujue and Igor, a monster about 2.5 meters tall and at least 300 kilograms appeared. Standing at this distance, they could clearly see that every piece of flesh on Dr. Andre's body had swelled to the point where it looked like it was about to burst, but there was not a trace of blood under his skin. Visually, he looked like a withered pomegranate. In general, the Whisperer was a deformed humanoid monster. Judging from its appearance, its combat power was much stronger than the mummified guy like Barefoot. Are there any fish that escaped the net? Andre could not see Igor in his line of sight, so after he tore the door open, he stared at Brother Jew and spoke. "Be careful. There's still." Nicholas shouted the moment he saw Andre, trying to remind him of Igor's existence. Unfortunately, Screech, a scalpel, as soon as he said "be careful," had already been inserted into his brain stem. Before Nicholas could finish his sentence, he had already died. Professor Andre. Phone Bujue very neatly stabbed the barefoot man. who was no longer of any use to him, to death. He told the monster at the door without a change in expression, "I believe we should talk." Brother Ju's ability to adapt was extremely strong. As the saying goes, plans can't keep up with changes, but Feng Bujue was a person who could constantly make new plans according to the development of the situation. The moment he saw Dr. Andre, Feng Bujue immediately gave up the idea of letting Igor attack the monster. The instantaneous judgment told Brother Ju that if he fought with Andre here, he and Igor would die. Therefore, Feng Bujue changed his strategy and quickly got rid of Nicholas to prevent this guy from talking nonsense. At the same time, he immediately communicated with Andre in front of him to test the other party's reaction. "Talk." Andre responded suspiciously. He stood at the door and looked at Brother Ju. "Talk about what?" Obviously, the doctor's AI was also very high. He stood there and did not enter the room because he clearly heard Nicholas shouting, "There's still." Although he did not hear the whole sentence, from what he could infer, Nicholas was probably trying to tell him that there was something in the room that was harmful to him. On the other hand, Feng Bujue was even more astute. While he was talking to Andre, he threw away the head in his hand and turned slightly sideways. Using the action of wiping the blood on his clothes as a cover, he gestured to Igor to not act rashly and to remain invisible. Chapter 1142. It's nothing. Feng Bujue looked at Dr. Andre calmly and replied, "I just want you to know that if you want to capture me for the ritual, I can cooperate with you." "Oh." Andre looked at Brother Ju and thought for 2 seconds. "Was it Nicholas who told you about the ritual?" "Huh, he told me a lot of things." Brother Ju used his special skill of mystifying things. "You seem to be." Andre stared at Feng Bujue for a few seconds and said, "Not normal." "Why do you say that?" Brother Ju asked. "It's not surprising that ordinary people would scream or moan when they see me in this state," Andre replied. "But I can't feel the slightest fear from your eyes. It's simple because I'm also an experimental subject in this base." Feng Bujue gave this answer almost without thinking. "And what I received was an experiment to erase fear." At this moment, let alone Andre, even Igor was fooled by him. Before this, Brother Ju only told Igor that he was also captured for an experiment, but he never mentioned what kind of experiment it was. But now, the answer seemed to be revealed. Combined with his previous behavior and his current calm attitude, his answer was undoubtedly very convincing. "Oh." Although Andre believed most of it, he still asked cautiously, "How come I didn't know that there was such an experiment in the base?" "Who do you think you are?" Feng Bujue replied. "Are you the person in charge of all the plans here? Or are you the political commissar of the organization?" Brother Ju combined the situation of the Soviet Union at that time and asked a question that left Andre speechless. "Huh?" Andre sneered and said, "Then, can you explain, how did you subdue Nicholas?" Also, before he died, he said, "There's someone else in this room." What did he mean? "VNO, 9. Feng Bujue quickly replied again. Multitasking had always been Brother Ju's habit. While they were conversing, he had come up with many excuses. Therefore, facing any question, he was able to answer it smoothly. "VNO 9. Judging from Andre's expression, he knew something about this. "The plan to create super soldiers?" "That's right. I've injected myself with VNO 9 before, so my physical ability is slightly higher than the average person. As long as I use a sneak attack, it won't be too difficult to deal with Nicholas." Feng Bujue's nonsense came out of his mouth, and it was half true and half false, making it very difficult to distinguish. And what Nigel wanted to say to you before he died was, "Be careful. There is a soldier injected with VNO 9 in this room." In terms of Chinese grammar, this sentence was actually a little awkward. According to our language habits, it was more like, "Be careful. This person has been injected with VNO 9, or "Be careful. This person is a soldier who has been injected with VNO 9. However, from the perspective of Russian, this explanation seemed to make sense. Moreover, at that time, Nicholas only had his head left, and this head was in Feng Bujue's hand. In this case, Nicholas could neither use his hand to point nor turn his head to look. Under the premise that he couldn't point at a specific target, it made sense that he used "there's someone else in this room." "Oomph, I see." Andre was fooled. He responded, and after a few seconds of silence, suddenly, crackle. There was a burst of firecracker-like sound coming from his body. At the same time, the skin and flesh on Andre's body that had swelled to the limit suddenly shrunk at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not long after, his entire body was like a deflated balloon, shrinking into a mummy like Nigula and the others. Seeing the change in Andre, one of Feng Bujue's doubts was dispelled. Previously, Nicholas had said that the Whispers looked no different from us, but when Andre appeared, it was not the case. Now, Brother Jew understood the reason, and also what Andre meant when he said, "I am in this state." Last question. After Andre completed his transformation, he asked, "Why did you kill Nicholas immediately after I opened the door?" "Oomph." Brother Jew put on a cold expression. "From the moment you appeared, the situation was no longer under my control. I had to torture Nigel. If I let him live, he would definitely say a lot of unfavorable things to me in front of you." He tilted his head, and a fanatical light flashed in his eyes. "I don't want to die here. Compared to death, I'd rather take a gamble and accept the ritual." These words were also half true and half false, and there was no big loophole in his logic. After hearing this, Andre laughed and said, "Oh, it's about the same as what I thought." In this second, he finally revealed a smile that a monster should have, a strange, sinister smile. "Since that's the case, come with me." As he spoke, he leaned to the side and made a pleased gesture. "Okay, let me take something first." Feng Bujue took the opportunity to reply. This sentence was not only for Andre, but also for Igor. Because at this moment, Igor was standing between Brother Jew and the toolbox, and the thing that Brother Jew wanted to take was obviously the toolbox. "Take something?" Andre showed a suspicious look again. "What do you want to take?" He suddenly showed a somewhat ferocious look. "Don't tell me, after seeing that I've removed my previous form, you have the idea of sneaking up on me?" He sneered. "Ha! Although my appearance has changed, if you treat me as the same as Nigel, I'll be very troubled." "I didn't mean that," Feng Bujue replied. "It's just, these things are what I've collected before, such as tools, medical supplies, weapons, and so on. It's a pity to throw them away." "Oomph, whatever." Andre snorted coldly. "Anyway, when the inner you takes over the body, you'll realize how stupid your current thoughts are." 3 minutes later, Feng Bujue and Andre had already arrived at the ritual room. Along the way, Brother Jew walked in front with the toolbox, while Andre followed behind him vigilantly. 6 or 7 meters behind Andre was Igor, who was quietly tailing them. Igor's tracking skills were not outstanding, but fortunately, when Andre walked, every step he took would make a bang sound, as if his skinny body was still bearing the weight of the monster form just now. In short, as long as one did not deliberately make any noise, one would not be discovered on the auditory level. As for the visual level, even if Andre looked back, he could not see Igor, so there was nothing to worry about. "So, should we start now?" Feng Bujue put down the toolbox and the documents in his arms on the ground, then looked at Andre and asked. At that moment, Brother Jew was standing at the edge of the cement platform, and Andre was 2 meters away from him. Igor, with Brother Jew's signal, stood at the door to watch. "You just need to go up." Andre pointed at the cement platform. "Can I stand?" Feng Bujue asked as he stood up. "Yes," Andre replied, "as long as you are on top of the magic circle." After Feng Bujue stood up, he used a condescending gaze to ask calmly, "The people who came for the ritual earlier were forced to lie down because they refused to go up, right?" "Ha! That is one of the reasons." Andre smiled again, but this time there was a hidden danger in his smile. Feng Bujue did not ask what the second reason was because he knew he would soon experience the answer himself. 2 seconds later, Andre asked, "I still haven't asked for your name." "Feng Bujue," Brother Jew answered. "Okay, let us begin." Feng Bujue. At this point, Andre slowly raised both of his arms. At that moment, the mutated monster revealed an extremely reverent gaze, and he started to chant a series of strange incantations. Even though the system did not translate the language he was using, Brother Jew could still tell that he was speaking Hebrew. Unfortunately, being able to tell did not mean that he could understand it. Just like how many people could differentiate between Spanish, Japanese, and French, even if they had not really studied these three languages. This is... About 10 seconds later, Fong Bujue, who stood on the cement platform, saw the magic circle under his feet glow. Almost at the same time, he was drenched. Why do I feel like I have just written a sentence that can easily be misunderstood? Blood seeped out from the surface of Fong Bujue's body. It seeped out from every inch of his skin and pores. Seeing this, Igor panicked. He was hesitating whether he should go forward to save Brother Jew or not. This feels not bad. Fong Bujue saw through Igor's thoughts, so he used a calm tone to say that to let Igor know that he was fine. But actually, Brother Jew was feeling very bad. It was not the kind of bad feeling where his body was sticky with blood, but the kind of bad feeling brought on by intense pain. He already understood why the other participants had to lie down. It was because they were in so much pain that they could not stand up. Only Brother Jew could stand and speak without a change in expression. Even Andre, who was chanting, had a change in expression when he heard Fong Bujue's words. He had not encountered something like this during a ritual before. The ritual lasted for about 3 minutes. Andre's chanting became softer and softer until it became an inaudible whisper. At this time, the blood on Fong Bujue's body had dried up. He was like a dehydrated plant, a mummy. The intense pain that seemed to come from the depths of his soul had also stopped. Instead, it was replaced by a strange feeling of pleasure and a strong urge to hurt his own body. Oh, I see. Brother Jew, who was in his mummy state, spoke with the same expression and tone as usual. As he spoke, he raised his hand and used his finger to cut off a piece of flesh from the left side of his face. This feels so King good. This made Igor break out in a cold sweat. He could not help but think, if Brother Feng's mind is turned into a demon and he tries to kill me, Igor did not even dare to think about what would happen next. To be fair, Igor was not afraid even when facing the Whisperer. However, if he were to face a mutated and hostile Fong Bujue, he would be scared to tears. Ha ha ha. A few seconds later, Andre let out a strange laugh, indicating that the chanting was over and the ritual was complete. Then he said to Brother Jew, as expected, your soul and body are strong enough to bear the burden of the ritual. Fong Bujue stepped down from the cement platform. He lowered his head to look at his own body and mumbled weakly, now I know why all of you had to tear off your own clothes. They are so sticky and sticky. It is so uncomfortable. Huh? Andre laughed. What's the use of clothes? Skin, muscles, organs, bones, they're all meaningless. Before his voice trailed off, he casually tore off a piece of flesh from his shoulder. Our skin is just a shackle that binds us. It's just that we still need to use it to release our compatriots trapped in this world. You can do it. Fong Bujue did not seem to care much about Andre's words. When Andre was talking, Brother Jew had already walked to the toolbox, squatted down, and opened it. Andre was puzzled by Brother Jew's response and attitude. What's wrong with you? The Whisperers were one of the stronger existences among these crazy, mutated beings. They all retained part of the memory from the other world, so they could use spells and had higher intelligence. However, even Andre, who was a senior Whisperer, had never seen a case like Brother Jew, who did not seem to have any change in personality after being awakened. Nothing, I'm fine. Fong Bujue still used the same casual tone to reply to the man, and he did not stop what he was doing. Brother Jew took out all the VN09 from the toolbox. Most of them were stored in test tubes or blood collection bags, and started to prepare for the injection. What are you doing? Andre stared at his strange compatriot in front of him, and he fell into a state of confusion. This was because in Andre's eyes, the toolbox was just a dark shadow. Andre knew very well that in Brother Jew's eyes, the toolbox was also just a dark shadow. What am I doing? Isn't it obvious? I want to strengthen my skin. As he spoke, Fong Bujue took out an oversized syringe. Don't ask me how big this thing is. When you see it, you will remember your childhood, and then you'll want to cry. Of course, when you see it, your mind will be filled with strange images from movies. Then I suggest you go out for a walk, receive appropriate counseling, and stay away from crime. And started to extract the green liquid from the test tube. Chapter 1143. Enhanced. Andre was even more confused by Fong Bujue's behavior. You probably don't understand my current state is indeed much more powerful than an ordinary person, but the flaw is also very obvious. Brother Ju did not intend to listen to Andre. He rudely interrupted him and quickly continued. In this state, part of the brain's potential is overloaded, causing the other parts of the brain to have problems. As he said this, he had already injected the first tube of VNO-9 into his vein and was preparing for the second tube. First of all, the sense of pain has disappeared. This important perception, used to warn the body of danger, has been transformed into meaningless pleasure. It's baffling. Secondly, the vision has been greatly limited. Basically, it has reached the point where it can say goodbye to most of the visible spectrum. Although it has far superior vision when facing most warm-blooded animals, overall, I think the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. Listening to Fong Bujue's description, Andre was shocked. You are a scientist. You're the scientist, Dr. Andre, Fong Bujue replied. You should be able to summarize the situation I've described. Unfortunately, the memory and thoughts of a whisperer have caused you to lose the wisdom and judgment that a human should have. At this point, he finished injecting the second tube and started the next one. What you're left with now is only your cunning personality and some witchcraft knowledge from the other world. The former won't be of much use in most situations. As for witchcraft, with your spiritual energy and the endurance of this skin, coupled with the premise that your vision is limited, the number of witchcraft spells you can cast in this world is limited. What exactly are you? Andre was shocked when he heard this. What exactly are you? He did not use who but what. This meant that he already had an answer in his heart, but he dared not believe it. You suspect that I'm a demon god? Fong Bujue still did not turn to look at Andre. He just continued with what he was doing. Ha! You're flattering me. I'm just an ordinary mutant at best, not even a whisperer. Therefore, I didn't get too many memories of Higgin. He paused for a moment. But the biggest difference between you and me is that you have always been locked in a cage, while I can come out from time to time and take a breather. What did you say? Andre was shocked. That's impossible. Yeah, I think it's unbelievable too. Fong Bujue said in a relaxed tone. Normally, the human brain can't handle this kind of burden. If the self in the cage escapes, the brain will have problems, and then it will cause all kinds of mental illness. He shrugged and smiled. I think maybe I'm not a normal person. At this point, Fong Bujue had already injected all the VNO-9 he carried into his body. In any case, he was already in a mummified state. In this state, even if the VNO-9 worked on him, he wouldn't faint, he wouldn't die. He might even experience a strong sense of pleasure. So, a few seconds later, Andre probed. That's why you still have the ability to see your surroundings after being awakened? No, I can't. Fong Bujue knew why Andre came to this conclusion, so he answered directly. I'm the same as you. The world in front of me only has cold light sources and dark shadows. As he spoke, he pointed at the toolbox in front of him. It's just that I remember the position of every item in here. So, even if I close my eyes, I can complete the injection process at hand. Ridiculous. How can you remember? Andre was just about to refute Brother Ju's words, but halfway through, he stopped himself. Okay, let me take the things first. Not long ago, Fong Bujue's actions before he left the archive room flashed across Andre's mind. You at that time. The next second, Andre looked at Brother Ju with a shocked expression and muttered. That's right, at that time, I tidied up the toolbox a little. Fong Bujue replied with a smile. I spent a few seconds to confirm the position of the items I needed and put them in a place where they were easily accessible. While he was talking with Andre, Feng Bujua's body started to change. The VNO 9 seems to be working. Brother Ju suddenly changed the topic, and his expression changed slightly. This feeling, if I were still in a human state, I'd probably be struggling in pain right now. The subtext of his words was, I'm feeling so good right now. Asterisk, gurgle, gurgle. Asterisk, as soon as Brother Ju finished speaking, a strange squirming sound came from his body. Since he was all skin and bones, the protruding veins under his skin were clearly visible. At that moment, his blood vessels were glowing brightly, and his whole body was like a glow stick. This state lasted for about 2 minutes. During this time, they could clearly see the light coming from Brother Ju's heart, spreading to all parts of his body, and then back to his heart. As the cycle increased, the light gradually became brighter and brighter, and then gradually faded and dimmed. Finally, before the light completely faded, Brother Ju's muscles and the moisture on his skin had returned to normal. As expected, it's back to normal. At this time, Feng Bujue spoke again with a smile. The effect of the supernatural mutation allowed the body to quickly adapt to the toxicity of the VNO 9, and the VNO 9 effect repaired the damaged functions of the brain. As he spoke, he turned to look at Igor, who was standing by the door. All right, my plan worked. Let's continue to look for the exit. Plan? Andre suddenly turned around and followed Brother Ju's gaze. What plan? Who are you talking to? I don't need to report to you one by one. Feng Bujue gave Andre a look of indifference. You're no longer of any use to me. If you don't want to die, stay away from me. Otherwise, I'll send you back to the other side to play. How dare you? Andre had been suppressing a faint anger in his heart for a long time. At this time, he finally exploded. Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like that? Asterisk crackle. Asterisk as he scolded. Andre transformed again. His body suddenly expanded, and in less than 5 seconds, he transformed into his previous monstrous form. Oh, you want to fight me? Feng Bujue squinted at him and sneered. You're like a fat pig taking a stroll in the butcher's house. Do you want to die? Chapter 1144. There was no doubt that Andre had the upper hand in terms of size. But at this moment, the difference in strength between Feng Bujue and him was no longer something that could be made up for by the difference in size. In terms of raw strength, Brother Ju's strength and speed were a notch higher than Andre's. Moreover, Brother Ju's combat experience and wisdom were far above Andre's. This made this contest a no-brainer. Before Andre could see Brother Ju's movements clearly, he was already on the ground. Then, he saw a shadow rapidly growing in size on his retina. Even when his skull was pierced, he still did not understand how he died. Oof. You can't even withstand a single blow. After Feng Bujue finished off his opponent, he put away his weapon and walked over to pick up the toolbox and documents on the ground as if nothing had happened. Brother Feng, you. Igor stood by the door and looked at Brother Ju with fear in his eyes. His expression showed that he was not confident. Don't worry. This was the sentence that Feng Bujue said to Igor the most today. I'm still me. Nothing has changed. But just now you... Igor mustered up his courage and continued, have been turned into their kind. So what? Feng Bujue continued, my actions are determined by my will. Even if some kind of restriction in my mind has been removed, I will not succumb to instinct. In fact, even my instinct will not succumb to myself. Igor did not understand Brother Ju's words, but he had no reason to doubt him. Now, Feng Bujue had obviously recovered the vision of a normal person, which meant he could see Igor. And judging from Brother Ju's skills when he killed Andre, Igor would not be able to resist no matter what Brother Ju wanted to do to him. Therefore, Feng Bujue had no reason to lie to him. Okay, Brother Feng. Igor scratched his head. I believe you're on the side of humans. Humans? Feng Bujue said as he carried the toolbox and walked past Igor. I don't think I have the right to choose this side. I've always been on my own side. Other than that, he turned around and gave Igor a meaningful smile. You're the same as me. You're no longer a normal human. I hope you remember that. 5 minutes later, The two embarked on the journey to explore the base again. But this time, it was Fong Bujue's turn. At this point, he was finally able to relax along the way. He had successfully turned this nightmare mode scenario into a game with newbie difficulty. Even the boss of this scenario, Andre, had been killed by him. So how could he deal with the other sleep experiment mutants? Therefore, when Fong Bujue scouted ahead, he took out the document and read it as he walked. Previously, in the archive room, he had read a total of 3 documents. They were the Melior Project and the experiment records of the first and second sleep experiments. This time, he flipped open the 4th document and saw Resurrectional Project, converting the Novgorod into a land vehicle and putting it back into use. Fong Bujue almost laughed out loud when he saw the outline of the project. Speaking of a Novgorod, it was indeed a great oddity in the history of human war. This shallow-water gunship from the Tsarist era had neither superior performance nor glorious battle results. But it was still famous all over the world because of its oddity. The Novgorod was circular. Its hull diameter was 78 meters, its draft was 67 meters, its standard displacement was 2,491 tons, and it was equipped with very powerful cannons. As you can imagine, it was basically a big bowl floating on the sea. Thanks to its unusual shape, the Novgorod, which had more than 3,300 horsepower, had a maximum speed of less than 7 knots, about 13 kilometers per hour. If the sea was calm, the speed of a human swimming in the sea would be about the same. In addition, every time this circular battleship fired its cannons, the entire ship would lose control and drift due to the recoil. All in all, the facts prove that this thing should not have been created at all. All right, I wish you success. Fong Bujue skimmed through the document and only felt that if this plan was really implemented, it would at most create something similar to the underground base used by the villains in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it would be a simpler version. So, he continued to flip through. The 5th document was still not an experiment report, but a document that recorded a failed weapon project. This project was the legendary anti-tank dog project. This matter could be explained in a few sentences. During World War II, the Soviet army tried to train military dogs to carry explosives to blow up tanks. In the end, during the actual operation, the dogs that were released from the trenches would often be frightened by the gunfire and run back. Then, the Soviet soldiers could only sigh before they were killed by the explosion. We are also King dogs. So, if you come out to run, you'll have to pay for it sooner or later. Dogs are man's best friend, and people who betray their friends usually don't have a good ending. Is there really any meaning in keeping this kind of document? Fong Bujue cursed in his heart after he finished reading the record. Could it be to prevent some idiot from coming up with a similar anti-tank cat project one day? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but chuckle. Speaking of which, the most efficient one should be the anti-tank political commissar. Let them take this sticky bomb made by the British, also a funny invention in World War II, and counter it, Brother Fong. At this time, Igor, who was walking next to Brother Jew, noticed the change in his expression and asked curiously, "Is there anything funny recorded in this file?" It's nothing. I just happened to remember something funny. Fong Bujue didn't explain much to him, as he was afraid of hurting the feelings of his Soviet friends. So, he casually said something perfunctory and began to flip through the next document. This time, he finally saw the words "the 3rd sleep experiment" in the title. Okay, let me see. Brother Jew only took 2 seconds to read the summary and preparation section of the record. This time, the 5 people were all held in solitary confinement. After he browsed through the format and number of people in the experiment, he directly skipped to the section where the changes began. On the 7th day, Dr. Andre, who had been lying in bed for many days, showed an extremely anxious state and paced back and forth in the room. Chapter 1145. On the 8th day, other than Professor Andre, the other 4 subjects started to bleed profusely. We had no choice but to send them to the infirmary for resuscitation. On the 9th day, Professor Andre, who was left in the cell, started to use his own excrement to draw some strange symbols and words that we could not recognize on the wall. He wrote a lot. When I filed this record today, he had almost covered the entire wall with his excrement. The record ended there. There was nothing about the 10th day. Obviously, at that moment, Fong Bujua was experiencing the 10th day 1 hour later. As I expected, there is no exit here. Fong Bujua came to another corner of the map. As expected, he ran into a dead end. Brother Fong, what should we do now? Igor had a worried look on his face. We've gone through all 4 sides and corners of this floor, but there's no exit. Just as Igor said, they had already walked a full circle around the edge of this floor. Along the way, the two ran into 3 mutants from the sleep experiment. Speaking of which, the 3 of them were quite pitiful. When they ran into Brother Jew, they thought they had run into their own kind, so they were not on guard. In the end, they were killed by someone. They died with a grievance. There has to be an exit. After giving it some thought, Fong Bujua said, but someone has purposely hidden it. The someone that he was referring to was naturally the people from the Golden Foundation. When they ran into the first nameless mutant, Fong Bujua noticed that the monster's memory had been corrected. He could still remember all kinds of information, but he could not remember where the exit was. Later, the same thing happened to Brother Barefoot. He could use his own coordinates to deduce the location of the archive room, but he could not remember where the exit was. This kind of collective specific memory loss was obviously caused by some kind of interference from the higher dimension. Brother Jew initially suspected that this was the doing of the system, but after giving it some thought, he did not think so. Yes, the system of Thriller Paradise would do something like this, but the method of a system was usually clever and hidden. It would not give off such an obvious feeling of abruptness. Later, when Fong Bujua connected it to the sandbox theory, he understood the people who made the interference and the people who created this simple sandbox were the same group of people. If one had to make an analogy, the system was like a good writer. He could quietly push forward the plot while fixing the small bugs that he accidentally left behind. The Golden Foundation was like a bad reality show director. They would purposely show what they wanted to do and make the audience feel fake and helpless. You mean, after hearing what Brother Jew said, Igor asked, he thought for a full 10 seconds before asking, the exit is disguised so that we can't see it? A bunch of people who can't even deal with the details of the environment, to have them disguise the exit, that is a bit too much. Fong Bujua laughed. I believe the actual situation is. As he spoke, he turned to look down the corridor. The exit here is not on the 4 sides, but somewhere in the middle of this floor. This. Igor thought about it, and then slapped his forehead. You're right. This place is underground, and the exit is facing upward. In other words, the ceiling is the edge. I believe. Fong Bujua picked up where Igor left off. The exit here is most likely something like an elevator. He shrugged. The reason we can't find the exit is actually very simple. It's because the signs in the environment have all disappeared. If those signs were still there, we would have been able to reach the exit easily. He paused. Of course, if the memories of Niguli and the rest were not blocked by those people, we would have been able to leave easily as well. Just as Brother Jew said that, suddenly, buzz, buzz, buzz. There was a burst of buzzing sounds. Waves of formless energy surged in from all directions, crisscrossing and shuttling back and forth. Oh, what are they going to do? Fong Bujua stared with his dead fish eyes and muttered. Could it be that they want to? Whoosh! In an instant, the wind from the punch interrupted Brother Jew's train of thought. The person who launched the sudden attack was none other than Igor. Oomph! Fong Bujua snorted coldly and raised his arm to block the heavy punch that was aimed at his face. However, although he protected his head, the bones of his forearm still broke under the heavy pressure. You're not going to hide anymore, are you? Fong Bujua's words were not directed at Igor, but at the people who were watching. On the other hand, Igor took advantage of the situation to pursue and attack. At this moment, the burly Soviet man was like a different person from before. He was originally honest and simple, but in the blink of an eye, he had become a cold-faced and ruthless fighting machine. Ah, never mind. Feng Bujue fought and retreated, his tone as relaxed as before. No matter how you deal with it, it's all the same to me. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The buzzing sound became more and more rapid, and all the scenery was distorted, making people dizzy. Igor, like the surrounding scenery, became like a reflection in the water. His speed was also affected as a result. He became slower and slower. Obviously, your skills are not up to standard, but you still want to interfere too much, and this is the result. Feng Bujue looked at the distorted things around him and commented calmly. After 6 or 7 seconds, Brother Ju's arm had completed its self-healing. Then, he used his speed advantage to get away from Igor. At the same time, he shouted to the empty space in the corridor, "Do you think you can stay out of this and play with me like an experimental specimen?" He smiled. "Haha, let's wait and see." Even though the space was distorted quite severely, it could not stop Feng Bujue's actions. 5 minutes later, Brother Ju went all the way back to the door of the archives room. Then, in a sense, this script is quite interesting. Feng Bujue had his back to the door of the archives room. He sorted out his memory a little and then said, "Instead of saying that the system gave me a difficult problem, it's better to say that it's a three-way game between me, the system, and the Foundation." As he spoke, he took out the stack of documents from his arms. "The system wants me to crack this sandbox and go out to find trouble with the Foundation, but it has to try its best to ensure that the inherent difficulty and principles of the Nightmare script are not broken. The Foundation wants to observe me and interfere with me, but it has to prevent me from noticing their existence." Feng Bujue said in his heart. However, just noticing the existence of the Foundation can't be considered as cracking the worldview. At this stage, the system should be limiting me. I have to get out of here to complete the cracking. While thinking, Feng Bujue quickly reorganized the documents in his hand into the state when he first took them out, and the order was exactly the same. Now, the Foundation has used this emergency measure to show that they have given up on observing me, and their goal has changed to stopping me from getting out. Feng Bujue's train of thought had been straightened out, and it was getting clearer. This change has given me a piece of information, and that is from the perspective of the people at the Golden Foundation. The thing that can help me get out has already fallen into my hands. At that moment, Feng Bujue flipped through the documents again. From beginning to end, he used extremely fast speed to scan through all the content. It can be seen that I have misunderstood the meaning of these documents from the beginning. This time, after Brother Ju flipped through the documents, he smiled. Those documents that look very funny and those documents that I thought were useful and related to the sleep experiment are essentially the same thing. Because my thinking is still limited to the so-called main story and plot, I subconsciously categorize these documents. He shook his head. But in fact, I only need to use the purest puzzle-solving method to treat these 6 documents as the same set of fragments that record information. With that in mind, more than 10 different pieces of information flashed before Brother Ju's eyes. Each piece of information was like a long and thin spider web, and in the end, they joined together to form a large and well-organized web. Miliawa, Russian, turn left. The first 5 days, no abnormalities. Keep moving forward. 5 intersections. The 6th day, the situation took a sharp turn. Turn? Where should I turn? Feng Bujue thought as he walked. When he reached this point, he stopped and looked to the left and right. In the next few days, the prisoners will sit back to back. He repeated this sentence and noticed that there were 2 doors facing each other on the right, but there were none on the left. So that's how it is. After confirming the direction, Brother Ju continued to move forward. The 9th day, 4 prisoners, 2 of them, until the 14th day. The next set of information was slightly more difficult. He had to go to 3 different intersections to find the keywords in the 4th and 2nd, which are the number and arrangement of the doors. Then, he had to walk in the correct direction for a distance of 14 intersections. After deciphering all the hints in the first 2 documents, Feng Bujue came to the door of a room. He tried the metal door of the room, and the voice message he received was, old metal door. The lock is rusty, but it seems that it can be opened with brute force. With this sentence, Brother Jew was relieved. Now, he didn't need help from others. He could kick the door open with a casual kick. Thus, Brother Jew entered the room without any problems and found a key in the room. The appearance of this item was the verification of his previous series of deductions. After Feng Bujue put the key in his pocket, he entered the next stage of the deduction, beginning the second experiment. Beginning the second part of the journey. The experimental specimens and methods used in this experiment will be adjusted so that we can obtain more diverse data. In other words, for this part, a new rule will be adopted. It will be more complicated than the first part. From the perspective of puzzle solving, every sentence in the experiment report could be interpreted as meaningful information. 15 death row prisoners ranging from 30 to 60 years old. 15, 30 to 60 years old. Odd and even numbers. Group 1, 5, same as the first time. Group 2, 3, 3, 4, 2 each. 5, 6, and 7, 1 each. The puzzle this time was more complicated than the first part. Feng Bujue thought for a while. Although he had some hypotheses, he couldn't solve them. But he quickly realized that since the first part of the puzzle was made up of 2 documents, then the second part might need to be read by combining the 2 documents. Therefore, in addition to the large number of numbers and concepts provided by the second sleep experiment, Feng Bujue also took the resurrection plate plan into consideration. Changing from water to land. Change in use. Change in operation. Change in concept. Novgorod. Round. Change in concept. Put into use again. Oh. Brother Jew thought for a while. So, it's like this. When he turned the map in his mind into a planar view from above, he immediately had a breakthrough. The second part of the puzzle was indeed difficult. To be specific, it was to treat the rectangular base as a part of a circle from top to bottom. To describe it more vividly, it was like a waffle. Feng Bujue, who had walked around the base, naturally remembered that the number of horizontal and vertical corridors in the base was odd and even, respectively. The first group, 5, was the same as the first experiment. It meant that the first step was to walk in the same direction as the first step of the first part of the puzzle. Next, he didn't look at the second group, but continued to look at the situation of the first group. On the 8th day, there was a brawl in the first group. 1 person died, and the other 4 were injured to varying degrees. This was the next information about the first group. From this point onwards, the rules had changed. The sky no longer referred to a section, but to a door. In brawl, death, injury, these words were reflected in the system voice that could be triggered by every closed door. So on and so forth. According to this set of prompts, the corridors were treated as part of a circle, and the players moved clockwise. Sometimes there would be a situation of walking diagonally. Because the players couldn't go through walls, walking diagonally was a 3-step process consisting of walking straight, turning, and walking straight again. But it was still considered a part of the setting. To make a long story short, when the second part of the journey was completed, Feng Bujue arrived at the door of a key required to unlock room. It took him a lot of time to get here. Even for Brother Jew, it was quite strenuous to compare the planar view of the entire base in his mind, and at the same time, take care of the encryption conversion, reasoning, and so on. Phew. After listening to the prompts, Brother Jew took a deep breath, took out the key from his pocket, and reached for the door lock. Chapter 1146. When he opened the metal door, he was greeted by a room about 20 square meters in size. The lights in the room were on, so it was easy to see what was in the room. Obviously, this was a prison cell used for experiments. Also, the walls of the cell were filled with strange symbols and words. Needless to say, everyone should have guessed that this was the cell where Professor Andre was imprisoned during the 3rd sleep experiment. The words on the wall were basically written with his excrement. The conditions of the prisoners are not bad. When Feng Bujue walked into the room, he muttered, "They even eat whole wheat bread." Normally, when a person entered a room filled with the stench of excrement, even if they did not vomit, they would at least frown and cover their nose. However, When Feng Bujue came in, he smelled the air and guessed the food of the experimental subject from the smell. Professor Andre's hemorrhoids seemed to be quite serious. After Feng Bujue entered the room, he glanced around and noticed that among the shit-colored words, there were many dark red words. Looks like it's happening almost every day. Even though he was complaining, he did not forget the important thing. From the moment he entered the room, he had already started to think about the third set of hints. Anti-tank dog, sacrifice, a sacrifice that refuses to be sacrificed, or run back. For the third experiment, the first 6 days were basically the same as the previous 2 experiments, no changes. On the 7th day, pacing back and forth. With this in mind, Feng Bujue looked at the contents on the surrounding walls. "Oh, here it is," Brother Ju said as he looked at the wall facing the door. The 7th line of words on the wall had the same symbol at the beginning and the end. The 2 symbols were drawn with excrement that was stained with blood. Then on the 8th day, 4 people other than the professor, bleeding, sent to the infirmary. And on the 9th day, archived. This time, Brother Ju thought for a full 5 minutes before he turned around and left the room. Phew! It was not until he left the room that he realized, I was too deep in thought. I ended up standing in a place filled with the smell of excrement for a long time. Even Brother Ju had his moments of error. However, this kind of mistake would not cause any substantial losses. 15 minutes later, Feng Bujue returned to the gravity induction gate. Now Brother Ju knew very well that after entering this door, the area that led to Lab Room 1 was a corridor that spiraled inwards like a mosquito coil. However, this corridor did not curve inwards but curved inwards at a right angle. In the entire map, the terrain of this area was unique. The corridors in the other areas were all crisscrossed and orderly, extending all the way to the edge of the map. Only this place had a unique design. I thought the document would point to the exit. Looks like I was wrong again. When Feng Bujue was still quite a distance away from the gate, he saw a row of dark figures at the junction. There were 7 people standing there. 6 of them were mutants from the sleep experiment and ritual transformation, and the remaining one was Igor. In this sandbox with no markings or details, the system used all the resources that it could use related to the main plot to create a map that only exists in my mind. There were so many hostile NPCs in his sight, but Brother Ju was still unmoved. He continued to think. With limited resources, the system converted the method to break out of this sandbox into various information and transmitted it to me. He was getting closer to the figures, and his footsteps were getting faster. From the beginning, the system's main goal was not to get me out of the scenario, but to get me out of the sandbox. He took the opportunity to stretch out his hands from his pockets and leaned forward, ready to fight. After the Foundation saw through this, they gave up on observation and adopted this strategy. Hidden mission completed. Unraveling worldview. SCP observation plan. At that moment, 2 consecutive voice notifications were sent into Feng Bujue's ears. At the same time, the group of figures in front of him moved. Once they moved, Feng Bujue realized something. They know how to apply what they've learned. He instantly determined that the enemies in front of him had all become hybrid mutants like him. Obviously, after the Foundation's observers saw what Brother Ju did, they followed suit. They used the remaining sleep experiment mutants to carry out the ritual transformation on Igor, and then injected those mutants with VNO-9. In this way, these monsters all became hybrid mutants like Brother Ju. As for their intelligence and rationality, it did not matter. After all, the Foundation had used forced intervention to directly control the actions of these NPC monsters. As the last line of defense against Feng Bujue, they only needed to have powerful combat ability and combat instinct. Bang, 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 bang. It was too late to say the least. As the 2 sides clashed, Brother Ju suddenly stopped and flipped backward. The monsters could not stop their momentum, and following several loud bangs, they collided with each other. Some knocked into each other, and some slammed into the walls on both sides of the corridor. With that, The monster's first charge ended in a wretched state, swaying left and right. Very good. This is a bit challenging. At this time, Fong Bujue had already tossed away his toolbox because he had the power to crush the enemy's skull with his bare hands. However, he was now fighting 1 against 7, and the individual strength of the 7 opponents was not much different from his. In this situation, to win, it was still difficult. He had to rely on combat experience and skills. Fortunately, in this regard, Brother Ju had a great advantage. Although the monsters attacked fiercely and aggressively, Fong Bujue did not have a significant advantage in terms of speed. He was still able to dodge left and right with ease. If one had to make an analogy, this scene was like a fighting game. A group of very honest and aggressive AIs were ganging up on an expert character. I didn't expect. After fighting for a while, Fong Bujue smiled and said to himself, I can't believe I have such a day. At this moment, he could not help but recall the situation when he first met Blade Runner. The difference in physical skills was not big, and Brother Ju had a greater advantage in terms of raw strength. However, before Brother Ju obtained the psionic weapon, he was still suppressed by the other side. And now, Fong Bujue himself had become the side with better combat skills. When he saw the group of monsters rushing over like headless flies, with movements and attack patterns that he could see through at a glance, he finally experienced the feeling of a master beating a noob. Click! After fighting for 30 seconds, Fong Bujue saw an opportunity and smashed the back of the head of a mutant with a serpentine strike with his right hand, successfully killing one of them. As the number of monsters decreased, it became easier for Brother Ju to kill them. The second opportunity came 20 seconds later. Fong Bujue used a simple feint to trick 2 mutants into stumbling into each other. Then he spread his arms and easily took their lives. In this way, after 3 minutes of fighting, there was only one left among the 7 opponents, and that one was Igor. Just as Fong Bujue was about to decisively finish him off, suddenly, buzz, 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 the buzzing sound rang out again, and the waves of invisible fluctuations came from all directions once more. Fong Bujue, are you really going to kill Igor? The next second, a woman's voice rang out. Her voice sounded like it came from a faraway place. The timbre was obviously produced by some kind of device, and it was slightly distorted. He is just an innocent experiment subject, and he is your partner who has helped you survive. Humph! Don't you think it's funny to say something like that? Hearing that, Fong Bujue laughed coldly. The real Igor died in 1949, didn't he? He said as he fought. He died in an underground research institute and became the sacrifice of an experiment. He paused for a moment. What I'm facing now is just an image in a simulated world. Whether he's dead or alive, when you close this crude mirror world, he'll disappear. Until you open the next parallel universe, there will be another Igor, another Nicholas, another Andre. When he finished, Fong Bujue bounced off the wall and circled behind Igor. He followed up with a sweeping kick and shattered the man's head. Save it, the one who is talking to me. When Fong Bujue landed, he said coldly, if you have anything to say, you can talk about it when I get to your side. The voice did not reply to Brother Ju, but the distortion of the scenery inside the scenario intensified. One could imagine that the Foundation was in a terrible situation. They had even used the love card. This was a sign that they had run out of options. After dealing with the last batch of obstacles, Fong Bujue walked into the corridor behind the gravity gate. With his current physical function, there was no problem with the consumption of life points and stamina points. Anyway, as long as he did not do any strenuous exercise, even if he walked quickly, the 2 values would continue to recover at a very impressive rate. Blood, blood, blood. I remember there are a few bags here. 2 minutes later, Fong Bujue had arrived at the operating room and opened a cabinet in the corner. It's here. Inside the cabinet, there were some blood bags. These blood were all of the same blood type. They were probably prepared for Igor's blood transfusion when needed. Previously, when Fong Bujue was exploring this room, he had already found these blood bags. Considering that the blood was different from his blood type, and that Igor's blood was already fluorescent at that time, Brother Ju did not bring these blood bags with him. Okay, let's go. At this moment, Feng Bujue took a few blood bags, went out, turned left, and continued to move forward. When he passed by the room where SCP-1011 was stored, he still cautiously blocked his view to avoid causing trouble. After walking for a while, Feng Bujue once again came to laboratory room number 1, which was the room he was first teleported to. After entering the room, he turned on the light, then walked to the huge mirror, directly poked a blood bag with the strength of his finger, and began to draw talismans. He drew a total of 4 symbols, which were the 2 ends of the 7th row on the wall opposite Dr. Andre's cell. The repeated symbols marked with the blood of hemorrhoids. After he finished drawing, the blood in the blood bag was almost used up. So, Feng Bujue also threw away the blood bag and wiped his hands on his already sticky and dirty clothes. He then looked at the mirror and showed an evil smile. I know you're watching. Brother Ju laughed, huh? The system used the example of anti-tank dogs to describe your experiment, which is quite appropriate. As he said this, the 4 symbols on the mirror gradually changed and emitted a dark red light. It's describing a story. Humans pay for their arrogance. Current mission completed. Main mission has been changed. At this moment, the system notification came again. Feng Bujue opened the game menu and found that escape from the experimental base had been ticked, and the new main mission was destroy all observation records of SCP-3232 in the Foundation. Almost at the same time Brother Ju saw the mission, the mirror in front of him shattered. Ping ling 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 ling. A series of clear and crisp sounds of glass shattering suddenly rang out and continued to spread out. Faced with this scene, Feng Bujue did not even blink and let the fragments of the mirror fly towards him. As a result, the fragments were all invisible projections, and they passed through his body without causing any damage at all. What is this? It shouldn't be a physical facility, right? Feng Bujue looked at the dark space behind the mirror and whispered, Ping ling 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 ling. On the other hand, the shattering sound did not subside, and it seemed like it would never end, because it was not only the mirror that shattered, but the entire space. The cracks in the mirror extended out and spread to the walls, the ceiling, and even the ground within Feng Bujue's sight. Everything soon shattered. The layers on the surface turned into untouchable fragments that scattered and disappeared, and the dark space at the bottom had no light source. Brother Ju soon could not see anything. Then there was silence and darkness, no sound, no shadow. However, this was not the door to the void. At least Feng Bujue could still hear his own breathing and heartbeat, and he did not feel like his mind was being eroded. After a few seconds, finally, clang, clang, there was the muffled sound of metal being pulled and the obvious sound of an air pressure valve releasing. Then, in front of Feng Bujue, there was a strong light. Chapter 1147. Feng Bujue did not hesitate. He walked several meters toward the light source and stepped into a wide and bright space. The moment he left the sandbox, another system announcement appeared in his ears. Your character restrictions have been removed. Brother Ju had played many scenarios with limited abilities, but this was the first time he had heard this kind of notification in the middle of a game. It looked like the system really wanted him to deal with the Golden Foundation. This also proved that the Golden Foundation in this dimension was very powerful. Their interference had caused the system to be unable to operate normally. Therefore, the system had sent a demon who could break through the sandbox to deal with the Golden Foundation head-on. Stop right there. Feng Bujue's eyes had just gotten used to the light around him when he heard a shout. As expected, once he stepped into the space, he was targeted by more than 10 weapons. Brother Ju looked toward the source of the voice and saw the group of fully armed commandos. He quickly found the speaker among the crowd. Even though they were all in the same attire and had helmets to cover their faces, the speaker had an additional epaulette on his shoulder. The gun he used was also slightly different from the other commandos. With a closer look, it was not hard to guess that he was the leader of this commando team. Raise your hands and put them behind your head. 2 seconds later, the captain shouted out another instruction. Humph! Hearing that, Feng Bujue scoffed coldly. Then, he raised his hands and placed them behind his head as instructed. Now, don't move. Seeing how cooperative Brother Ju was, the leader did not waste time and followed the standard procedure. Not long after that, two commandos came forward to handcuff Feng Bujue under the order of their leader. Ho! This is the first time I've seen something like this. After Brother Ju was handcuffed, he immediately turned around to look at his wrists. He was a little curious about the handcuffs that were cuffing him because it was undoubtedly a new product made by future technology. The material used is definitely not metal. It feels like some kind of nanomaterial. Feng Bujue thought to himself. After the handcuffs are put on, they will automatically adjust according to the thickness of the person's wrist and tightly secure the hands. He tried to struggle a few more times. The material combines the dual advantages of toughness and firmness. It completely seals the thumb dislocation method. And even if the handcuffed person has the tools, he won't be able to bend his wrist to the right angle to open the lock. While Brother Ju was studying the handcuffs, the commando captain was talking into the communicator on his shoulder. Even though Feng Bujue didn't hear it with his own ears, he could guess that the other party's line was something along the lines of, "Target subdued, requesting further instructions. Take him to containment room 15 first." Sure enough, 10 seconds later, the captain completed the communication and gave the order. "Let's go." After the commandos who were responsible for escorting Brother Ju received the order, they waved the guns in their hands and urged him to move forward. Feng Bujue still maintained his silence. He turned back to look at the door that he had just stepped out from, and then glanced at the dark space behind the door. Then, he followed the instructions of the commandos and started walking. The guns in their hands appeared to be energy weapons. As he walked, he thought to himself, "Have I come to a world where bullets have been eliminated?" 15 minutes later, Feng Bujue was escorted into a room. After the commandos chased him into the room, the door automatically closed. Different from the environment in the previous scenario where the walls were made of cement, the base that he was in now was filled with metal products. Not only the door, even the room itself was made of an alloy that Feng Bujue could not identify. Other than that, based on the sound of the air valve when the door closed, the air pressure and oxygen content in the room were all controllable. This is not going to be easy. After Feng Bujue entered the containment room, the first thing he did was to carefully observe the 20 square meter space around him. In the end, he realized that the 6 sides of the room were impeccable. Even the light strips embedded in the walls were seamlessly embedded into the walls. Has the technology reached a level where surveillance and air pressure control devices can be hidden inside the walls? With that in mind, Brother Ju turned his gaze to the only door in the containment room. When I opened and closed the door earlier, the people escorting me did not do anything, and there is no keyhole or control panel inside or outside the door. This means that the door is also remote controlled. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Just as Feng Bujue was thinking, a buzzing sound suddenly appeared. Following that buzzing sound, the wall on the side of the room became like a giant LCD screen, and an image appeared. In the image was a beautiful woman wearing a white coat and a pair of black spectacles. 2 seconds later, the woman looked at Feng Bujue, or rather, she looked at the screen on her side and said, "Hello, Mr. Feng Bujue." Even though Professor Cox looked young, her tone and the presence that flowed out from between her brows gave off the feeling of a mature woman. And Feng Bujue could naturally sense that the actual age of the person before him was probably much older than her appearance suggested. "Hello, unknown lady." When Brother Ju replied, he already recognized the owner of this voice was the person who had tried to stop him from killing Igor earlier. "You can call me Professor Cox, Mr. Feng Bujue," Cox replied. "You can call me whatever you want, Professor Cox." Feng Bujue mimicked the way the woman spoke and replied mockingly. "Humph." Facing Brother Ju's reaction, Professor Cox scoffed and then continued. "First, I would like to represent the Foundation to welcome your arrival." "Thank you." Feng Bujue's sarcasm was on full display. "The way you treat your guest has left a deep impression on me." As he said that, He turned around and showed his handcuffed hands to the woman with malice. Huh? Professor Cox scoffed disapprovingly. Mr. Feng Bujue, considering your previous behavior, I think the way you treat your guests is still quite reasonable and appropriate. Is that so? Feng Bujue said. Then if I may ask, what is your next step? He asked with a relaxed expression. Are you going to house me just like that? If possible, that is indeed my intention, Cox said bluntly. But, judging from your attitude, you should be able to use some method to return to your dimension at any time. Since you know that, why would you go to the trouble of handcuffing me? Feng Bujue asked. Of course, it is because I, as well as all the project managers, believe that you are very dangerous. When Cox answered, there was a serious expression on her face. Ha! Then I am truly flattered, Feng Bujue replied with a smile. He wanted to test the man's reaction one step further. You are a sociopath, Feng Bujue, Cox replied instantly. I do not think you will feel flattered. She paused for half a second before continuing. Your goal has always been clear, and that is to break through the mirror universe that we have created and come here to complete some kind of mission that SCP-3232 has requested of you. Oh, speaking of that, at this point, Feng Bujue followed the man's lead. I do wish to ask you. His expression shifted slightly, and he said, this SCP-3232 that you mentioned, what exactly is it? For Feng Bujue, this was indeed a question because he had heard of this term for the first time when the system was updating the main quest. As an experienced SCP enthusiast who was familiar with various SCP projects, Brother Bujue naturally knew that in the current SCP project, there was no such number as 3,232. Other than that, he had come to the conclusion that the real identity of this 3,232 was most likely Thriller Paradise itself. But ultimately, he had not gone through the Golden Foundation's document on this project. He had to go through the document to know how well the Golden Foundation had grasped the nature of this project. I am not obligated to answer that question, Cox replied. Also, I think you actually know what the project number refers to. You're just trying to test how much we know. Obviously, not only was Feng Bujue testing the woman was also testing Feng Bujue. Even though they had only exchanged a few words, it was clear that the two were engaged in a heated exchange of words. Both of them had only said 30% of what they wanted to say, but they were trying to get the full story out of the other. Huh. Feng Bujue shrugged and sighed. Looks like we have reached a stalemate. Perhaps. Dr. Cox started to pace to the side. Perhaps we can talk about something else. As she spoke, she had already walked to her desk, and the camera moved with her. When Dr. Cox bent down to sit down, she seemed to subconsciously show off her cleavage. I noticed that you seem to be a writer, Cox continued. Cox was still talking. When talking about these unimportant topics, her expression became much more relaxed, and there was even a hint of gentleness between her eyebrows. I'm very interested to hear about the stories you've written. Oh, is that so? Who was Feng Bujue? He saw through the man's thought almost instantly, and he replied with a smile, Recently, I did come up with a very interesting plot. Do you want to hear it? Dr. Cox held her chin with one hand and revealed a charming smile. I would love to hear it. Actually, the plot is not that complicated. It is mainly about a woman and a man who have a video call, Feng Bujue said. It sounds a bit like our current situation. Dr. Cox's expression suddenly became a bit stiff. Feng Bujue ignored her and continued. To be precise, the two protagonists of this story are a menopausal woman who looks much younger than her actual age and a handsome, smart, and mysterious man who no one knows about. This time, Dr. Cox did not respond. She must have been shocked by Brother Ju's shamelessness. In the beginning, the conversation between the two of them was quite interesting. Although they didn't make much progress on the answers they were seeking, their psychological game was remarkable. Feng Bujue began to pace slowly as he spoke, until the woman received some information through the communication device hidden in her ear, or rather, an order. From that moment on, she changed her conversation strategy. Brother Ju put on a helpless expression. She began to seduce and flirt, trying to distract the man and delay the time. At this point, Cox's face darkened at once. She angrily raised her hand, took out a hidden communication device from her left ear, and slammed it on the table. She put on an angry expression and stared at Feng Bujue. Haha, sorry, your change is too sudden. Your acting is not natural enough. Feng Bujue said, also, I think it is better to expose you quickly, although it is not impossible to flirt with you for a while. When I reveal the truth, you will be even more embarrassed than now. Then I have to thank you? Cox said coldly. Her eyes looked like she wanted to eat someone. No need to thank me. Feng Bujue's extremely sarcastic response added fuel to the fire. I sincerely hope that you can still laugh later. Cox's patience had reached its limit. She could no longer hold back her anger and said something that sounded like a threat. Don't worry, I will always be able to laugh. Brother Ju continued. If one day I can't laugh anymore, I will just cut my own cheeks with a knife. Of course, I understand what you're trying to say. I think, from the moment you started winking at me, there's already a team of people who specialize in dealing with people like me. I can foresee that their interrogation style will be very tough, and they will have a way to stop me from leaving this realm of yours. Lucien paused for a moment before he continued. Of course, I understand what you're trying to say. I think, from the moment you started winking at me, there's already a team of people who specialize in dealing with people like me. I can foresee that their interrogation style will be very tough. His deduction was basically spot on. This made Cox's face turn even uglier. Don't worry, Professor Cox. After a few seconds, Feng Bujue stopped pacing. With a fearless and even expectant look, he said, I will not run away. Today, I have no reason to run away. Clang, clang. Just as Brother Ju said this, the electronic door behind him opened. Chapter 1148. When Feng Bujue turned around, a man in a black suit had already walked into the room. The man looked to be in his 40s. He had short hair, and the hair at his temples was already graying. However, there were no signs of baldness on his forehead. The suit he was wearing looked very neat, as if it had just been taken off the ironing board. It complemented his tall and muscular figure very well. Clang! 2 seconds later, the electronic door automatically closed again. The man in the suit's footsteps and gaze all stopped at this moment. Then, Dr. Cox saw this and immediately looked at the man in the suit. I'll leave the rest to you. She hurriedly said this and glanced at Brother Ju. Then, she ended the call. As the video wall turned back into a colorless metal wall, the room was shrouded in silence. In the room, 2 men stood facing each other. They were about 3 meters apart and silently looked at each other. Feng Bujue's expression looked very relaxed. There was a faint smile on his lips, but there was always a hint of sharpness in his eyes. The man in the suit had a steely expression on his face. There was no change in his expression. Even Brother Ju could not tell what was going on from his expression. What did you see? In the end, the man in the suit broke the silence and asked first. His voice was slightly hoarse, but it gave people a sense of stability and reliability. Regarding the question that he asked, other people might think that it was a random question, but Brother Ju understood what the man was referring to. I didn't see anything. Feng Bujue replied without hesitation. Is that so? The man in the suit said. Yes. Feng Bujue said. Even if I speak to you now, is it the same? The man in the suit asked. It's the same. Brother Ju replied. Rather than observing you, it's better to observe a statue. At least the statue contains a lot of the creator's thoughts and feelings. After receiving this answer, the man in the suit was silent for a moment. Then he said, Do you know what I saw? Heh. Feng Bujue chuckled. Tell me about it. What I see is a cloud of fog. The man in the suit continued. In the center of the fog, there's a person I don't know. Since this person has been dealing with the fog for a long time, he has adapted to moving in the fog. Because of this, he can make everyone who wants to spy on him return empty-handed. At this point, I'm sure everyone could tell that what they were asking and talking about was the first impression they had of each other. Hearing that, Feng Bujue tilted his head and scoffed coldly. I still haven't asked for your name. He purposely spoke in a genteel manner to see if the other party could understand him. You can call me Agent D19, or... Not only did the man in the suit understand Brother Jew's words, but he also didn't find it strange at all. Sir. Okay, D19. Phone Bujue continued. You can call me Phone Bujue or anything will do. When he said that, Brother Jew was calculating something else in his mind. This man didn't show any suspicion toward the way I spoke or the content of my words, and the speed of his reply was quite fast. From this, I can come up with two hypotheses. 1, he is already proficient in Chinese. 2, at this moment, he is being interfered with by the system, and he is completely unaware of it. On the other hand, D19's face was still drawn, and he used the same tone to say, Phone Bujua. Next, I will start the interrogation. He did not probe further into Brother Jew, but directly stated what he was going to do next. Phone Bujua understood the situation. He knew that people who would do something like this often believe that they would be able to take the leading role in the interrogation. Therefore, Brother Jew instantly asked, I guess your interrogation will be accompanied by violence, right? Of course, D19 said as he raised his fist and aimed it at Phone Bujue's face. But at that moment, Brother Jew suddenly lowered his head and rushed forward, using his head to meet the man's fist. Crack, 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 crack. Immediately after, there was a series of very obvious sounds of human bones shattering. So that's how it is. When D19 pulled his hand back, his expression finally changed. You are indeed not a normal character. He was not wrong. A normal person would not use their head to meet a fist. You flatter me. Phone Bujue resisted the pain that came from his forehead and forced a smile. He turned to D19 and said, I think you are more impressive. You have broken several of your fingers, but you did not even make a sound. His eyes shifted slightly, and his tone sharpened. Come to think of it, you are not a normal person, are you? I have indeed survived accidents caused by a few projects, D19 said bluntly. D19 did not mince his words. And after being exposed to multiple projects, he obtained some special abilities. Oh, multiple projects? Brother Jew raised his eyebrows. For example? No comment, D19 replied. TSK. I knew it would be this kind of answer. Phone Bujue spat and said with disdain. Bang! Before he could finish his sentence, D19 actually swung his injured hand again and threw a punch at him. At this distance, even with the help of the zero-time simulation, Brother Jew did not have time to use the same strategy as before. Therefore, with his hands cuffed, he could only use his torso to take the blow. What the F***CK? What is going on with this guy? After taking the punch, Phone Bujue could not help but curse internally. Even with broken bones, he is still able to exert so much power. Even my chest is damaged from the punch. The power that came from the punch was indeed shocking. If Phone Bujue was still in the restricted state, referring to the state he was in when he first entered the scenario and not the state he was in when he became a hybrid mutant, he might have been turned into white light. Thankfully, Brother Jew had already removed the restriction, so his level 50 character's defense and equipment could all be added into the calculation. Even so, that punch still caused him to lose 13% of his life points. I'll say this first. D19 glared at Phone Bujue and continued. My habit is to beat the other party until they beg for mercy. Bang! The reply he got was a powerful kick. This kick was fast, accurate, and vicious. Brother Jew made use of the moment when the man let his guard down because he was talking. He bent down to act like he was seriously injured by the punch earlier, and then he lashed out with a kick. It was too late to say anything. The kick landed on D19's stomach, and his whole body flew backward. In the blink of an eye, his back slammed heavily into the wall. Several seconds later, Phone Bujue's mocking expression returned. Looks like you'll have to change your habit. D19 groaned like he wanted to say something. But after a short struggle, his eyes rolled back, and he fell face first to the ground. It was unclear whether he was dead or alive. Did I accidentally use too much strength? This time, it was Phone Bujue who was a little confused. Based on the strength of his punch, he's already stronger than many players, but I didn't expect his defense and HP to be so low. In this matter, Brother Jew was undoubtedly a little emotional and had taken things for granted. D19's resistance was at most a little stronger than a normal human, so there was no reason for him to be able to withstand Feng Bujue's sudden kick that contained the power of Tempest Kick. Buzz, buzz, buzz. After another 10 seconds, the wall on the side of the room turned into a display again, and Professor Cox appeared on the screen. As expected, you're a dangerous person. Looking at Agent D19, who was lying on the ground, Cox appeared very calm, and this calmness gave Feng Bujue a whiff of a conspiracy. Hey, no matter how you look at it, this is just self-defense, Feng Bujue replied with a shrug. I'm the one who's being beaten while handcuffed. The danger I'm talking about is physical, Cox continued. Your subjective emotions are not within the scope of consideration. I thought you were going to say something else, Feng Bujue sneered. Then you should say that I'm powerful, not dangerous. It's all the same to us. At this point, Cox picked up the coffee cup on his desk and took a leisurely sip. Then he said, all I want is the data. Data. Feng Bujue looked at the screen and said, so, this is a test for me? As he spoke, he turned to look at Agent D19, who was lying face down and no longer moving. If you want to do that kind of thing, you could just use a D-grade personnel or use a device. Why do you need to use who told you? At this moment, Professor Cox interrupted Brother Jew. That's D19? Oh, hearing that, Feng Bujue's expression shifted slightly. Are you trying to tell me this so-called agent is actually a D-level personnel in disguise? Regarding this speculation, even Brother Jew himself did not think it was possible. This was because D19's presence, manner of speech, and the power that he unleashed when he attacked Feng Bujue all showed that he was not a normal person. No, he is not a D-level personnel, Cox quickly added, but Kwong. Bang. Before she could finish her explanation, the door opened again. This time, the person who walked in was actually a man who looked exactly like D19. You sure are heavy-handed, Feng Bujue. The D19 that walked in looked exactly like the one that Brother Jew had beaten to the ground, and they were wearing the same outfit. Ho! When Brother Jew saw the second D19 and heard what he said, he instantly understood many things. Could it be you have the power to replicate yourself? I'm sorry, D19 replied. I still have no comment. Even though he did not say anything, when Brother Jew said the word replicate, he used a feigned, nonchalant glance at the other D19 on the ground. And this fleeting movement was captured by Brother Jew. So, you going to continue the interrogation? Feng Bujue did not expose what he had seen and thought. He continued to use the attitude of a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water to ask D19. No, there has never been an interrogation, D19 replied. We're just acting for you, Cox added. Oh, Feng Bujue was confused. When did this start? Don't tell me. Your flirtatious gestures before, and your subsequent anger from embarrassment. Yes, that was an important part of the test. Cox once again interrupted Brother Jew. We have to make you feel like you've seen through everything and have control over the situation. She paused. And what are you going to do next, be it the intelligence that you showed when you faced me or the power that you showed when you were attacked by the agents? That is what we're going to see. She was not just saying that in hindsight. Just from her tone, it was clear that everything was part of her plan. Therefore, when he heard that, a fire rose in Feng Bujue's heart. All right, your performance has left a deep impression on us. On the other side, D19 took another step forward and made a please gesture at Brother Jew. Please. Feng Bujue. His hand was pointing at the door of this room. What's wrong? You've suddenly decided to bring me to another place? Feng Bujue asked. D19's attitude was as cold as ever. It was not a sudden decision. Long before I arrived at this room, your next stop had already been decided. Feng Bujue chuckled nonchalantly as he turned his gaze back to the D19 that had been beaten into a pulp. Looks like I can't say no to that. He suppressed the anger in his heart and decided to cooperate with the man. Soon, Fong Bujue obediently put on the handcuffs and was escorted out of the room by D19. D19, who had been knocked to the ground, was tossed into the room just like that. Based on Brother Ju's prediction, the real D19 had an easier time creating this kind of clone, or else he would not have acted so nonchalantly. Of course, there was another possibility that this D19 who was chatting with Brother Ju was also a clone. 5 minutes later, inside Dr. Cox's office. Dee-doo. Dee-doo. The electronic doorbell at the door beeped twice, announcing that someone had come to visit. Please come in. Dr. Cox didn't even check who was outside the door and responded. Then, the door opened, with D19 leading the way. Fong Bujue arrived at Cox's office. Once the two met, their eyes met in midair. They were like two cunning hunters who wanted to turn the other into their prey. Chapter 1149. There is something that I have to be honest with you. After Fong Bujue stood still, he was the first to speak to Professor Cox. What is it? Cox thought the man was going to say something important. So, she answered seriously. To her surprise, Fong Bujue stared at the coffee cup on her table and said, I quite like coffee as well. When he finished, Cox's face twitched. Then she gave a long sigh and raised her head to say to D19, Agent, please remove the handcuffs for him. It looked like Cox understood the meaning behind Brother Ju's words perfectly. Are you sure, Doctor? But D19 did not do so immediately because he deeply felt that this action came with great risk. Yes, I'm sure. Cox gave an affirmative answer. In that case, D19 did not say anything else. He took 2 steps forward and lifted Brother Ju's wrist slightly. Then, D19 used his right thumb to press on a notch on the handcuffs. In that moment, there was the sound of electricity. Then, Fong Bujue felt the pressure on his wrist lessen. The handcuffs deflated like a life buoy that had its air deflated, and very naturally, they fell from his hands, unlocking by scanning a specific person's fingerprint. At that moment, Brother Ju thought to himself, the technology in this world sure is reasonable. Mr. Fong Bujue. After 19 removed the handcuffs, Professor Cox immediately said, I hope you will not betray my trust in you and do something that will bring trouble to both of us. Save that kind of nonsense for other people, Doctor. Brother Ju rubbed his wrist and replied calmly, You and I both know that if I intend to use violence, this pair of handcuffs will not be able to stop me. He paused and added, Actually, if I had that intention from the beginning, I would not have let you put this thing on me. Hearing that, Cox looked at Fong Bujue quietly for a few seconds. Then, she snorted and glanced at the side of the room. The coffee machine is over there. Please help yourself. Fong Bujue understood that the other party was taking advantage of this opportunity to change the topic and start a new round of probing. You don't have to test me like that. Fong Bujue did not walk in the direction the man indicated because he knew it would be a waste of time. I can tell you frankly that the technological system here is very different from the one in my world. That's what he meant. I don't know how to use that chandelier-like coffee maker. In addition, Brother Ju was careful. He didn't say, your technology is more advanced than my world's. Instead, he said the technology system is different. This way, the other party wouldn't be able to judge the technology level of Brother Ju based on the age. Really? When Cox heard this, he leaned back in his chair and said in a non-committal tone, I'd like to hear in detail. What's the technology system on your side? Huh? Fong Bujue laughed. Sure. He paused for half a second before changing the topic. If you have anything to say, wait until I've seen the information on SCP-3232. Humph! Cox scoffed and replied, I'm afraid I don't have the permission to show you the information on any project. Go ahead and apply. Fong Bujue replied without hesitation. He walked to the chair in front of the man's desk and sat down, crossing his legs. Mr. Fong Bujue, do you think this request of yours is reasonable? Cox asked in a tone that was close to a question. Of course, it is reasonable. And Fong Bujue once again used a very fast speed to reply. I am something that you cannot contain and cannot fully understand. You know that better than anyone else. You know that if I want to, I can disappear from your sight at any time and never return. You also know that I can use violence to communicate with you, and I don't care about the risk that comes with that." He spread out his hands and put on a very arrogant look. "To put it more clearly, if I want to leave, I can leave. Before I leave, I can kill you or do something else, such as releasing some of the projects in your facility. No matter whether my operation will be stopped or not, for me, there is no harm in trying." At this point, Feng Bujue turned around and snapped his fingers at D19. "Excuse me, can you give me a cup of coffee without sugar?" Then he turned to Professor Cox and said, "Professor, I believe you know very well what I'm talking about, or else at this moment, we wouldn't be sitting here talking to each other." A smile appeared on his lips. "You are a clever person. When I kicked away Mr. D19's duplicate, you knew that I wanted to negotiate with you. If not, I would have kicked more than 100 people to death before I put on the handcuffs. But negotiation is not an interrogation. Both parties have a certain amount of bargaining chips. Now, my bargaining chip, or rather, my choice obviously has the upper hand, so I have more than enough reasons and conditions to make you compromise first." Brother Jew said all that in one breath. During the process, Professor Cox's expression changed multiple times before he entered a state of speechlessness. Agent D19, on the other hand, maintained his expressionless face as he stood at the back, hesitating in his heart. Should I go get him his coffee or not? Please wait for a moment. After a while, Professor Cox stood up. "I need to leave for a few minutes." "Go ahead. I'm not going anywhere." Feng Bujue slumped into the chair and raised his hands as a pillow. "Agent, give him the coffee." Before Cox walked out of the office, he said to D19. D19 helplessly walked to the wall and started to operate the coffee machine. Feng Bujue sat there and said without turning his head, "Mr. D19, I'm very curious. If I go over the desk now and touch Professor Cox's computer, what will you do?" When Brother Jew said that, D19's action of getting the coffee froze. However, he quickly regained his composure and said coldly, "All the programs are encrypted. If you're not doing it yourself, you can only activate some of the system's basic programs." Ah, I knew it. Regarding this point, Feng Bujue had already guessed a thing or two. At the moment, he merely wanted to confirm his hypothesis through D19. In an era where even handcuffs can be unlocked by scanning fingerprints, it must be very difficult to steal, right? Even though you've led the conversation smoothly and used this conversational tone, D19 said as he returned with a cup of coffee. But your intention to get information about our world's technology is quite obvious. He placed the coffee before Brother Jew. Therefore, I refuse to answer this question of yours. Fine. Then let's talk about something else. Feng Bujue shrugged. How old are you this year? Are you married? Do you have children? Have you ever played a group, beep, with your clones? After being bombarded by Brother Jew's trash talk for 10 minutes, D19 was at the edge of collapse. Thankfully, at that moment, Professor Cox returned. "Mr. Feng Bujue." The professor walked through the door and said, "I've already reported your request to the higher-ups. We will need to wait for a while before we can get a clear response." "Oh," Brother Jew answered casually. The next second, he used a casual tone to say something that caused Professor Cox's expression to shift. In other words, it will take some time to forge a file on SCP-3232, right? As soon as she finished speaking, Dr. Cox froze on the spot. She looked like a second-rate actress who had suddenly forgotten her lines on stage. "Don't be so surprised," Feng Bujue said. "Before you left, I already knew what you were going to do." He sipped his coffee and said calmly, "In those 10 minutes just now, you just ran to another room to observe my interaction with D19 and arrange for the document to be forged." As he spoke, he turned around to smile at the professor. "Now, are you thinking, could it be that he has secretly planted a listening device on me? And when I asked that question, you immediately thought, could it be that he can read people's minds? Can you do it?" Cox asked directly. "No," Feng Bujue replied. "You're a very annoying fellow. You know that yourself, don't you?" Cox's expression had become rather ugly when he answered this sentence. "Yes, I am that charming." Fong Bujue replied with a cheeky grin. But that is not the point. He took another sip of coffee. Professor, for a game like this, even if you find 10 people of the same level as you, I can play with you for the whole day. However, even if I have the patience, I don't have the time. So, let me give you a piece of advice. Put away your tricks and save your colleagues some work. Hurry up and hand over the real information on SCP-3232. I know you have the authority to do that. When you brought me into this office, I knew you were at least member 05. Cox heard that and was silent for a moment. Then she turned to say to D19, Agent, you can leave us for now. This time, D19 did not express any objection. He turned and left without a word. On one hand, D19 also understood that whether he was there or not would not make much of a difference. If Fong Bujue wanted to use violence, he would not be able to stop him. On the other hand, D19 really did not want to be in the same room with Brother Ju anymore. In those 10 minutes, just now, he felt like he had been mentally corrupted. Now, he urgently needed to do an internal, standard mental evaluation. Team 5, you all heard that, right? 1 minute later, Professor Cox returned to her desk. She pressed a button on the desk and said into the communicator, Don't make any more fake documents. Also, turn off the surveillance in the room. 2 seconds later, a reply came from the communicator. Okay, Professor. Then, do you want to keep the video surveillance? Of course. When Cox replied, she raised her head to look at Brother Ju. If the video surveillance is turned off, the target will kill me and escape the room. You won't even know. Air. The person on the other end of the communicator reacted awkwardly. Understood, Professor. After a short conversation, Professor Cox ended the call. By then, Agent D19 had already left the room. Now, only Fong Bujue and Professor Cox were left in the office, and their conversation was no longer monitored. I have come into contact with some projects that have higher intelligence, Professor Cox said as he worked on his computer. As Dr. Cox spoke, he began to operate his computer. And you may be the one that has frustrated me the most so far. Then I am honored. Fong Bujue replied with a smile. Before he finished, Professor Cox's hand left the optical keyboard. She used her finger to lightly push on the floating flat screen on the table and turned it to face Fong Bujue. At that moment, SCP-3232, or Thriller Paradise's project file at the SCP Foundation, was displayed on the screen. Can this screen be controlled with a finger? When Fong Bujue asked this question, his eyes were locked on the flat screen as he hurriedly collected the information on the screen. Yes, please. Cox placed her elbows on the table. She crossed her fingers and held her chin as she replied. Okay. Brother Ju answered and reached out to drag the scroll at the edge of the screen. This meant that he only used the time it took for the 2 sentences to finish reading the whole screen. Your reading speed is quite impressive. Professor Cox looked into Brother Ju's eyes and made an accurate observation. It's okay. I'm used to it, Fong Bujue replied. I've trained myself in this field, so I know how difficult it is to be able to do what you did, Cox added. That's enough. If we continue this conversation, we'll be talking about the difference in talent. A normal person would stop there, but Brother Ju still wanted to add, your tears. 1 minute later, Fong Bujue finished reading all the information on SCP-3232. In the process, he naturally realized that this world was the same one that he had experienced as Rudy Austin last time. However, the era had been changed to the distant future. Therefore, he immediately thought of 2 things that he needed to pay attention to. First, the SCP-079 in this universe was no longer in existence. Second, even though he had information on more than 2,000 SCP projects in his mind, he had to consider the influence of time on these projects. For example, some biological projects might age or even die. Some projects with limited resources might have been exhausted. Some projects might be damaged, become obsolete, or lose their unique properties due to repeated use. Considering the number, complexity, and unpredictability of SCP projects, then there were the various hypotheses of the Foundation's discovery, destruction, and replacement projects over the years. Even for Feng Bujue, it would take a long time to sort through all this information. Chapter 1150. So that's how it is. After reading the whole file, Feng Bujue thought to himself, no wonder they are the foundation of the future. Even though under the influence of the system, they are unable to find out the definition of thriller paradise, mission, and player under the limited conditions, they have basically grasped the concept of these things. Now that they have reached this stage, the system has to come up with a countermeasure. But to completely wipe away their knowledge of SCP-3232, that does not appear to be possible. After giving it some thought, Brother Ju changed the topic. Even if I destroy this facility that I am currently in and kill everyone here, the project file cannot be destroyed. To completely wipe away all traces of SCP-3232 in this world, the only way is to kill everyone in this world who has read this file and destroy all the information related to this project in the Foundation's electronic and paper database. Considering the fact that this future world might have other forms of data storage that I do not know about, even if I do the above two things, I might not succeed. Brother Ju thought to himself. At this point, a solution that might seem insane to normal people was born in Brother Ju's mind. How about I try to destroy this entire world? Brother Ju thought to himself. Thankfully, this thought only lasted for less than 2 seconds before it was tossed out of his mind. No, that's not right. That's the wrong idea. Feng Bujue then realized the content of the mission is not for me to completely wipe out this world's knowledge of thriller paradise, but for me to destroy all observation records related to SCP-3232 in the Foundation. In other words, soon, a logical conclusion that matched the wishes of the system appeared clearly in Feng Bujue's mind. I get it now. After giving it some thought, Brother Ju's train of thought suddenly cleared up. The system wants to cut off its connection with this world, right? Now that he had figured this out, many other details also became clear to him. SCP-3232 is a project that cannot be contained, and its existence is debatable. As long as the system no longer generates scenarios in this world, then the file on SCP-3232 will soon become a piece of paper. The only evidence that supported this was the observation record. Once I destroy those records as well, then, without anyone needing to do anything, the Foundation itself will categorize SCP-3232 as something that never existed several years later, and its documents will be classified as neutralized. Any project that has been destroyed or has lost its special properties, extra dimensions, or negative effects. The projects below this level should have a memo to record the previous information of the project. The levels were all debatable. As for the possibility of destroying the observation record, it was obviously very high. First of all, the observation record was not a conceptual thing like the project file, but a narrative text. It was a series of detailed lists of times, places, and events. If the project file was destroyed, it could still be rewritten according to people's memories. However, if the observation record was destroyed, it was impossible to rewrite it according to people's memories. This was because the basic requirements for such records were to be detailed and accurate, not just correct. Under such requirements, people's memories were undoubtedly unreliable. Secondly, unless there was some kind of substantial breakthrough in the research, otherwise, long files like the observation record that were constantly being added would not be sent out of this experimental facility. For example, in the project file that I was browsing, there was not a single observation record of Thriller Paradise's scenario. It only mentioned the existence of the observation plan. Obviously, those detailed observation records were kept inside the facility that carried out the observation plan. In other words, this base that I was currently in, that was why the system tried so hard to guide me to break out of the sandbox and come here. To put it bluntly, the mission this time was very clear. I just needed to follow the instructions on the surface. The difficult part was the player had to figure out the system's intention and the above information before they could take action. Only by knowing how and why could the player complete the mission that the system wanted the player to complete without exposing its intention. If the player did not see through this step and acted recklessly, then there was an 80 to 90% chance that the player would expose the target of the mission. The result of that was the NPCs would try their best to transfer the observation record out, causing the mission to fail. Taking a step back, even if they failed to transfer the record, as long as the player's intention was conveyed to the outside world, then the mission would be a complete failure. Because then the entire Golden Foundation would know that SCP-3232 existed. Not only that, they were trying to make SCP-3232-1 destroy the evidence of its existence. Even though, personally speaking, I have cleared the scenario, but the system will be completely exposed because of that. SCP-3232 will definitely be upgraded to a Keter-level project by the Foundation, and they will have to conduct more research on it. That is something that will bring endless trouble. Fong Bujue used 2 minutes to go through all that in his mind and use it to clear his mind. Now his goal was clear. No matter what, he had to find out how the observation record was stored, like where the electronic file of the observation record was stored, and whether there were any paper copies or other media. Then, he had to destroy the record without exposing his intention. And if his intention was exposed, then he had to kill everyone who knew about it before the news spread out of the base. Currently, Fong Bujue believed that the most efficient solution was to blow up the facility with a nuclear bomb. He knew that most of the SCP Foundation's bases had this kind of emergency plan. Once a project, usually a Keter-level project, went out of control, a nuclear weapon launch site closest to the facility would immediately fire at the base in order to suppress the crisis. As for the human casualties, compared to the danger that could cause the extinction of mankind, the people of 10 bases could be sacrificed in an instant, much less one base. However, Fong Bujue also knew that if this kind of emergency plan was activated, there would be a corresponding program to transfer all the data in the facility. Therefore, when Brother Ju made his move, he had to take this into consideration. It didn't mean that if he used force to release a few things like 682 and triggered a nuclear explosion, the matter would be settled. Okay, my compromise and sincerity are in front of you. After a while, Dr. Cox spoke again to Fong Bujue. It's your turn, right? Huh? Fong Bujue chuckled and looked back at the doctor. Sure. He took a sip of coffee and said, What do you want from me? Why do you ask when you already know the answer? Dr. Cox pointed at the floating computer screen and said, Of course, I hope that you can cooperate with us to complete the information of this project. You're talking about SCP-3232? Fong Bujue asked again. Yes, Cox replied. Oh, about that. Brother Ju began to bluff. Huh. It seems that you've completely misunderstood. What did you say? Cox was confused. It was unclear whether he was doubting the authenticity of Lu Zhou's words or wondering what was wrong with the project file. What? Fong Bujue repeated and asked. Did I not make myself clear? Cox thought about it and said then, Tell me, which part of our understanding is wrong? You should ask another question, Fong Bujue said. Which part of your understanding is correct? He spread out his hands and revealed a mocking smile. The answer is none. You're trying to tell me. This time, Dr. Cox's expression was one of pure distrust. Our project file on SCP-3232 is full of meaningless mistakes. Yes, Fong Bujue answered with such confidence that anyone who heard it would be shaken to a certain degree. Dr. Cox immediately sneered. This was a normal reaction. Even if Brother Ju was telling the truth, Dr. Cox would not immediately accept this statement. She had poured a lot of effort into this project, and the observation project was the first major project in the Foundation that used the Parallel Universe Regional Mirror Image Generation System. She would definitely not overturn all of her previous research results just because of a few words from an unknown and untrustworthy cross-dimensional creature. Okay, after the sneer, Dr. Cox continued. Then I'd like to ask you, what is the true nature of this project? I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to tell you everything without any basis. Fong Bujue said and shrugged. Besides, I can see that you don't believe me. He laughed and did not hide his mockery. Whether it's because of a woman's stubbornness or because of the work you've done, at least at this moment. Compared to someone like me who knows the truth, you're more willing to believe in the research results you've obtained. In this short speech, he had already used provocation, retreating in order to advance, loosening the reins in order to grasp them better, and other tricks. He had even purposely carried a hint of sexism. It could be said that every word and sentence was stuck on the reverse scale of Cox, the strong woman. When Cox heard this, she was naturally angry, but she could not do anything. Otherwise, it would only confirm what the other party said. Then what do you want? The doctor tried to control her expression and tone as she spoke to Brother Jew in a deep voice. Fong Bujua was waiting for the other party to ask this question, but when Dr. Cox said it, he still maintained a neutral attitude and said, "Doctor, the observation project mentioned in the file, you're responsible for it, right?" What? Cox immediately understood the meaning behind Brother Jew's words. "Do you want to see the observation records?" "Yes." Fong Buja nodded and replied, "I don't need a lot, just 3 to 5 copies will do, combined with a few different records. I can explain the theory of SCP-3232 in detail." "Ridiculous." The next second, Cox shouted without hesitation. She questioned, "So far, you haven't said a single word about SCP-3232. But you've tried again and again to get information about this project. I seriously suspect that you don't want to tell us anything or you don't know anything about SCP-3232, so you want to use us to get information about it." Her words were loud and clear, and her reasoning was logical. But when Fong Bujua heard this, he was as calm as ever. His expression did not change. "Doctor, you're too agitated. Don't change the topic." Cox glared at Brother Jew and said coldly. "Huh?" Fong Bujua laughed. "Whether you believe it or not, my understanding of you people is far more than you can imagine." "Oh." Cox raised her eyebrows. "For example? When I said the term, 5 personnel, didn't you think it was strange?" Fong Bujua hinted. When this was said, Cox's expression changed. She thought to herself, "That's true. How'd he know this term? I've been monitoring the conversation between him and D19. He didn't mention this at all, and it was only after that he read the document about SCP-3232. If you need it, I can tell you the serial numbers and general characteristics of the 10 SCP projects right now." Fong Bujua did not give Cox much time to think. He quickly continued, "Of course, that has nothing to do with the observation records that I asked you to show me." He paused. "I just want to tell you that I don't care about getting information from you, because I already know enough. The reason why I told you about SCP-3232 based on the observation records is because it is indeed necessary." Brother Jew spoke quickly, leaving no room for Cox to interrupt. "For example, if I asked you to teach a class on discrete mathematics or solid-state physics without the aid of any teaching materials, would you be able to do it?" Cox did not answer this question because the answer was obvious. She hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "So, you mean you have to use an example to explain the characteristics of SCP-3232? "That's right," Fong Bujua replied. "Then can't you use your own example?" Cox asked again. "Isn't your experience in the Psychotronics Underground experimental base a ready-made record of SCP-3232's activities?" "Sorry, I can't do that," Fong Bujua replied. "Why not?" Cox asked. "I don't know the true face of Mount Lushan, but I'm fated to be in this mountain." Brother Jew answered her with these words. He did not know how the system translated it, but Dr. Cox seemed to have understood it. She thought about it for about 10 seconds before replying somewhat impulsively. "How about this? Tell me the information of the 10 projects first, and I'll see if you really know or just pretend to know." Chapter 11:51. For Fong Bujue, it was not difficult for him to report the complete information of 10 SCP projects, even if he took the future factor into account. After all, he had more than 2,000 SCP projects in his head, so he had a lot of options. He only needed to pick out some SCP projects that are almost impossible to change with the passage of time, and then summarize them. Of course, when Brother Jew was narrating the file, he was careful. Even though he could have recited the file word for word, he did not do so. He deliberately used a very simple and highly summarized way to describe the project information he knew. For example, SCP-173, Brother Jew described it as a concrete creation that will teleport over to snap your neck the moment it leaves your sight. While SCP-222, Brother Jew described it as a sarcophagus that is located inside a tunnel on Mount Dolomites, located in Aviano, Italy, that can replicate a living person. For examples like that, he only gave the serial number and characteristic. He did not even mention the level of the project. This was undoubtedly a reflection of Feng Bujue's meticulous way of doing things. Although the things he picked out were projects that were unlikely to be affected by time, after so many years, the files on these projects would more or less have been revised several times. Perhaps some of the wording of the document would be changed, or perhaps a few experimental records would be added to the document, or perhaps, after enough research, the level of the project would be upgraded or downgraded. Feng Bujue also took these into consideration. Therefore, when he reported the information to Dr. Cox, he always used a more general way of describing the project. Originally, this kind of file was not known to even the people inside the Foundation. Many project files were restricted by the level of access. Even if they knew, no one would recite the entire document in detail. Basically, everyone would just memorize the concept after reading it. Therefore, as long as Brother Jew said the project number and the basic characteristics of the project, the other party would not be able to detect any flaws. Okay, I've already said more than 10. Do you want to continue? 2 minutes later, Feng Bujue used the speed of a crosstalk to describe the characteristics of more than 10 events. Throughout the whole process, he kept an eye on Dr. Cox's expression. When he finished the 12th project, he felt that the other party must have believed him. So he stopped and asked this question. This information, Dr. Cox's expression was very serious. It was the kind of seriousness that could not be concealed. Where did you get it? Since the Golden Foundation can conduct research on the hyperdimension, then naturally individuals or organizations from other dimensions can come and study the Golden Foundation as well. Feng Bujue gave another plausible answer. Looks like, Cox asked tentatively, you've done quite a lot of research on us. I can't tell you that. Feng Bujue mimicked the tone that D19 had used earlier and gave this answer without hesitation. He quickly changed the topic. In any case, I've already proven that there is no need for me to pry into your intelligence. With regard to whether you will show me the observation record of SCP-3232 or not, honestly, I don't really care. He paused for a moment. You were the one who asked me to explain the theory behind SCP-3232. Now, because you didn't provide me with the necessary conditions to explain it, I can't do it. So, that's your problem. Even though Feng Bujue said, to be honest, what he said was basically not the truth. He was indeed adept at deceiving others and bluffing his way out of the situation. And the expression and actions he put on were indeed indifferent. It was very convincing. Phew. Cox heard this and let out a long sigh. She leaned back in her chair. At this moment, she raised her hand and pushed the black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of her nose. She looked at Brother Jew's face with a burning gaze. She did not say a word. It was obvious that she was thinking and hesitating. Feng Bujue, on the other hand, continued to use an enigmatic and cunning smile to respond to the man's every stare. Answer me one more question. After a moment, Cox spoke again. If your answer is reasonable, I'll show you the observation records. Ask away. Feng Bujue answered. When he said this word, Brother Jew was already prepared to deal with all kinds of questions. Why do you want to cooperate with me? A second later, Cox asked, since you can leave our dimension at any time, what reason do you have to stay here and negotiate with me? What do you gain from this? Feng Bujue laughed. I thought you were going to ask me something. He picked up the coffee on the table and finished the last sip. It's very simple. Because SCP 3232 suggested that I do it. His answer this time was solid, and he did not need to explain further because he had already said before that if he wanted to explain the theory behind SCP-3232, he would have to show him the data first. Therefore, this answer, once again, was a checkmate for Dr. Cox. In this round of communication, Fong Bujue only gave a dozen or so pieces of known information that were meaningless to both sides. He also used a series of logically sound lies that could not be verified and debunked, and successfully forced Dr. Cox to comply. Okay, I can show you the observation records. Dr. Cox stood up and said, but we have to change locations. Okay. Fong Bujue also stood up. Anywhere is fine. Dr. Cox did not directly take Brother Ju out of the office. Even if she wanted to, it was against the rules. After all, in the eyes of the doctor, Fong Bujue was still SCP-3232-1. No matter how good he was at talking, he was still a project, or rather, a derivative of a project. Therefore, the doctor still had to follow the procedure. First, she gave an order to the outside world through the communicator and summoned a few guards who were responsible for escorting the target. Then, she said goodbye to Brother Ju and quickly left the room. For the next few minutes, Fong Bujue and the few guards in the office looked at each other, waiting for the doctor to arrange the next step. After a few minutes, Dr. Cox returned to the office and called Fong Bujue. Then, the two of them, accompanied by the guards, set off to their destination. This time, under the doctor's request, the guards did not handcuff Brother Ju. Just like that, they left the office and walked for a while before entering an elevator. The elevator finally stopped on the second floor. They were on the fourth floor just now. Then, under the guidance of the doctor, they walked into a cylindrical corridor that was transparent on three sides, except for the bottom. As they walked through the corridor, Fong Bujue looked through the glass surrounding the corridor, or maybe it wasn't glass, but some other transparent building material, and saw the scenery outside the building. As far as his eyes could see, he saw a forest. Although the forest was not dense, he could tell that this was the kind of wilderness that was far away from the city. It was a place that normal people would never set foot in their entire lives. Also, he could see that the corridor was completely exposed to the outside world. At both ends of the corridor, there were two large buildings that were hidden under optical camouflage. So that's how it is, using this corridor to divide the base into two parts. This way, when some projects fail, it can minimize the loss and death of the facilities. Before they finished the corridor, Brother Ju opened his lips to give his opinion. To put it bluntly, in the event of an emergency, we can immediately abandon half of the people and equipment in the base, right? Professor Cox continued, personally, I am very opposed to this method. Unfortunately, most of the people in the upper management, or should I say, most of the men, she paused and made a quotation mark with her hand. Then, she turned to look at Brother Ju. All of them think that this is the most reasonable and rational plan. The doctor's tone of voice clearly showed her dissatisfaction. Even the guards could tell that she had a disagreement with the higher management. She also had a certain degree of discrimination against women. The next second, Fong Bujue chuckled coldly and continued, Professor, do you think this method is a bit lacking in humanity? Isn't it? Cox asked. Fong Bujue did not answer her question. Instead, he said, so, when an emergency happens, the decision to blow up half of the base is not made by people. When Professor Cox heard this, she seemed to have realized something. Although she had already realized that Brother Ju was testing her, she adjusted her expression before she turned around. Unfortunately, the three guards on the left, right, and back of Brother Ju had already used their facial expressions to answer Brother Ju's question. The guards were not commandos, so they did not wear helmets. How do I know? After Fong Bujue finished his test, he wanted to take the opportunity to show off. He quickly took over the doctor's words and laughed. Isn't it obvious? He paused for half a second before he continued. When an emergency happens, it is undoubtedly unreasonable to let someone or a group of people outside the base decide whether to blow up half of the base. When the time comes, it will be difficult to report the situation here to the outside world in a timely manner. Not to mention, even if the report is reported in a timely manner, the people outside the base will not know the specific situation here. Their decision could very well be wrong. As Feng Bujue spoke, he gestured with his hands. His action made the 3 guards nervous. They almost grabbed their stun batons and stabbed him. Fortunately, they soon realized that Brother Ju was only using his body language to accompany his narration. Then, is it okay to give the decision to blow up half of the base to someone in the base? Feng Bujue continued. Without a doubt, that is even more impossible. He turned his head sideways and looked at the guard on his left. For example, brother, if I give you this right, during an emergency, if you were in the facility where the accident happened, what will you do? The guard naturally heard Brother Ju's question, but he did not answer. According to the rules, unless it was absolutely necessary, he had to avoid interacting with people or things that were being escorted. Another example is, if you're not in the facility where the accident happened, but 90% of the people in the facility are on the opposite side. They're your colleagues, friends, or other people who care about you. What will you do? Feng Bujue continued, but he did not intend to listen to the guard's answer. This question was the same whether he answered or not. As long as his point of view was clear, it was fine. So, it is not okay to let the people in the base make the decision. A few seconds later, Feng Bujue said with certainty, Okay, you guessed it right. Since Brother Ju already knew, Professor Cox had nothing to hide. The self-destruction program of the base is completely controlled by the computer. The computer will not hesitate. As long as the trigger condition is met, it will immediately start the corresponding process. This was a very important piece of information. It was also the biggest breakthrough Feng Bujue had made so far in his probing and intelligence gathering. After knowing this piece of information, Brother Ju's plan, which had many variables in his mind, suddenly became clear. I don't like to rely on guesses for everything. 2 seconds later, Feng Bujue used the same pretentious tone as before. That is called inference. Inference known Xiao, don't you know? When he said the last half of the sentence, he purposely used a mixture of Shanghainese and Sichuan dialect. The weird accent made him sound even more despicable. It was just a wild guess from a limited number of hypotheses, and from the reaction of the guards, I knew that I guessed it right. Professor Cox did not want to be outdone. She looked back at Brother Ju and said, this kind of reverse reasoning and self-justification is something anyone can do. Ayaya. So, you've seen through me. To her surprise, Feng Bujue admitted it with an embarrassed smile. His eccentric and unpredictable personality, which seemed to change all the time, really made Cox very depressed, because she never knew what kind of reaction he would have next. Not long after, the doctor led the 4 men behind him to the end of the corridor. After passing through an electronic door, they entered the left half of the facility. Less than 5 seconds after they entered the left half, suddenly, oh yeah, Feng Bujue suddenly stood still and said loudly. The doctor and the guards all turned their heads to look at him as if they were facing a great enemy. 3 electric batons were already raised. Brother Ju looked at them and put on a very serious expression. I want to use the bathroom. Chapter 1152. In the scenario, Feng Bujue did not need to go to the toilet. The system would not create a corresponding physiological need for him, and it would not allow him to take off his pants. However, the people from the Golden Foundation did not know that. From their perspective, Brother Ju's request was quite reasonable. First, he stayed in the parallel universe mirror image generator for 4 to 5 hours. In fact, more than half of the time was spent writing novels. Then he came to this space, stayed for another 10 minutes, and drank a cup of coffee. Under these conditions, his request to go to the toilet did not seem suspicious. Professor Cox sighed and showed a helpless expression. Fine, follow me. After all, she had to wait for Feng Bujue, so she led Brother Ju to the toilet. When they reached the door of the male toilet, the professor signaled for the guards to follow Brother Ju into the toilet. Regarding this, Fong Bujua did not say anything. This was within his expectations. After entering the male toilet, Brother Ju scanned his surroundings and then walked toward one of the cubicles. "What are you doing?" Fong Bujua saw the three guards following him closely. "Do you want to come in and help me clean up?" Hearing that, the three guards looked at each other and hesitated. In the end, they stopped at the cubicle door. This was something that couldn't be helped. The space in the cubicle was limited. An adult sitting on the toilet would occupy 80% of the space. If there were people standing around him, there would definitely be physical contact between them, and it would be very close physical contact. Wait, 2 seconds later, just as Brother Ju entered the cubicle and was about to close the door, one of the guards suddenly said, "Please leave the cubicle door open." "Why should I leave it open?" Fong Bujua asked. "So that I can throw feces at you? Even if you don't think it stinks, I think it's dirty." The guard ignored his trash talk and replied coldly, "We cannot allow you to leave our sight." "Whoa, you pervert." Fong Bujua gave him a sidelong glance. "What do you want to see?" His accent was now inexplicably northeastern. "Do you believe that I'll scare you out of the closet the moment I take off my pants?" Faced with such a shameless person and vulgar words, the three guards rolled their eyes and were speechless. "This cubicle is only so big. Do you think I can crawl into the toilet and run away?" Fong Bujua said. While the guards were distracted, he swung his hand and closed the door of the cubicle. "If you're so worried, just lie on the ground and watch my feet." At this point, the guards couldn't say anything more, of course. They didn't have to lie down to look at Brother Ju's feet. They only had to squat down to see the bottom of the cubicle's door was about 12 centimeters away from the ground. As long as the people outside squatted down, not only would they be able to see Fong Bujue's shoes, they would also be able to see his ankles. Therefore, the guards did not have to worry about him using the shoe removal trick to make any strange movements. In the next few minutes, the atmosphere in the toilet became very strange. 3 men squatting outside a cubicle with a suspicious attitude and monitoring another man's excretion process. This was indeed strange. From the situation under the cubicle, Fong Bujue should already be sitting on the toilet, but the guards didn't smell the stench for a long time, nor did they hear anything fall into the water. It wasn't until 3 minutes later that there was a sudden plop sound from inside the cubicle. The next second, there was the sound of the toilet flushing and the sound of Brother Ju quickly turning on the air freshener nozzle. From a logical perspective, his series of actions were quite reasonable. Many people would have similar experiences. For example, when you were in a public toilet and heard or knew that there was someone waiting outside the cubicle at this time, if a stench wafted out, it would be somewhat embarrassing. However, this was the logic of a normal person in the real world. Fong Bujue was not a normal person, and his actions were naturally not to cover up the stench. Brother Ju's actions were obviously to create the illusion that he was really going to the toilet to relieve himself, and he really did relieve himself. Only in this way could he cover up what he was really doing in the cubicle. Phew! After the series of actions, Fong Bujue immediately let out a long sigh and said, "Everyone, don't panic." He raised his voice and said to the guards outside the cubicle, "I still need to clean up." At this moment, the guards outside the cubicle were too embarrassed to exchange glances because the atmosphere was as awkward as it could be. Brother Ju's words made it sound like the 3 of them were urging him to take a dump outside. Just like that, after another minute, the cubicle door opened. Fong Bujue quickly walked out, turned the corner, and went straight to the sink. At that moment, the 3 guards subconsciously looked into the cubicle, but in less than 2 seconds, their eyes followed Brother Ju's figure and moved away. They did not find anything unusual in the cubicle and did not take a second look. After all, the cubicle was so narrow that they could see everything in one glance. Okay, 10 seconds later, Fong Bujue quickly washed his hands and walked out of the toilet. "Let's go. Don't let the lady wait for too long." Before he finished speaking, he had already walked out of the toilet, and the 3 guards followed closely behind. At this point, Brother Ju's act of going to the toilet was over. At least from the guards' point of view, there was nothing unusual. However, 10 seconds after the four of them left the toilet creak, the door of the cubicle that Feng Bujue had used earlier moved when no one was touching it. Then a thin, stooped figure flashed out from the corner behind the door. Hiss, hiss, hiss. It worked. After Musashi stood still, he lowered his voice and let out his signature weird laugh. The place where he appeared was the blind spot between the door and the wall. Looking from above, it was a triangular area. The area was very small, and it was impossible for an adult to squeeze into this space. But Musashi Kojima could. In terms of setting, he was a boy in the 3rd grade of primary school, and his body was tall and thin. However, with just these 2 points, he couldn't hide in the corner because that place was too narrow. Otherwise, the guards wouldn't have completely ignored him. The key point for Musashi Kojima to be able to hide in the corner was that he was a character from a ridiculous anime. Also, one of his abilities in the anime was to twist his body and turn himself into a noodle or even a piece of paper. Then, he would spin at high speed and create multiple afterimages of his face. Although the description alone would make people think that this was some kind of combat ability, it was not, there is not much time. When Musashi Kojima walked out of the cubicle, he was still holding 2 Mark II grenades in his hands. He muttered, "I have to hurry." On the other hand, Feng Bujue, who had finished peeing, was led by Dr. Cox to take another elevator. This time, their destination was the left half of the basement. I hope going back underground won't remind you of the terrible experience not long ago when the elevator started to move, Dr. Cox said without turning his head. What? The decor of the basement. Is it the same as the simulation of the former Soviet Union's underground laboratory? Feng Bujue asked. Before Dr. Cox replied, the elevator had already reached the floor. Buzz, buzz, buzz. With the sound of the elevator door opening, a silver, bright corridor appeared in front of everyone. The 4 sides of the corridor were made of a metal that Feng Bujue couldn't identify. At first glance, it looked like silver or stainless steel, but it revealed a sense of heaviness that was incomparable to the two. The lighting in the corridor was light strips embedded in the walls and ceiling. This was the same equipment that Feng Bujue saw in room 15. Although the appearance, details, and technology are very different, but, Cox said as she walked out of the elevator, the basic structure of our floor is indeed very similar to the underground laboratory. It is formed by many intersecting corridors. As she spoke, she walked forward. Feng Bujue, surrounded by 3 guards, followed the doctor's footsteps. After walking out of the elevator, they walked 7 or 8 meters before they arrived at the first intersection. At this moment, Cox suddenly stopped and turned to face the wall of the corridor. He stretched out his hand and touched it gently. Beep, beep. 1 second later, 2 short, soft beeps were immediately heard. Then on the wall that the doctor touched, an area of about 40 centimeters square lit up like a monitor. This kind of device was not a rare thing in this world. In this corridor, there would be a small screen area on the wall that could display images. As long as the staff of the Foundation touched the screen area with their finger, a complete electronic map would be displayed. The map would also indicate the current coordinates of the person who touched the screen. The technology tree on your side is obviously not crooked. There are quite a few things that are quite convenient. Feng Bujue looked at the doctor's action and immediately understood the principle of the device on the wall. How about on your side? Cox finished looking at the map and continued walking. As she walked, she responded, all the technology is used on interdimensional travel, life cycle, and various weapons of war. Her question was undoubtedly a test. Based on her observation of all the SCP-3232-1 players that had appeared so far, it was not surprising that she came to this conclusion. Haha, you will know in a while. Feng Bujue smiled mysteriously and replied in a low voice. Brother Ju's reply had a double meaning. On the surface, it sounded like he was saying, when I explain the theory behind SCP-3232 to you, you will understand. But in reality, what Brother Ju meant was, wait a little longer. When Musashi's Kaganoi causes a commotion, you'll be able to see with your own eyes the various superdimensional powers that I can use. However, Just when Fong Bujua thought that his plan was almost complete, a shocking change occurred. Main mission has been changed. At that moment, the system's voice suddenly rang in Brother Ju's ears, causing him to be shocked. What? The main mission has been changed? Indeed, this did not make sense. The system's goal was clear. It was to have Fong Bujua stop the Golden Foundation from investigating Thriller Paradise. With that as the premise, why would the main mission change? Something is not right. Brother Ju quickly opened the game menu and looked at the changed mission content. Your plan has been exposed. What? Fong Bujua could not believe his eyes. He repeated it twice in his mind with different tones. What? At that moment, the content that appeared in Brother Ju's quest tab could no longer be called mission. It was more like the system was communicating with him through the quest tab. 15 seconds ago, Musashi Kagane was captured by the Golden Foundation. Before Fong Bujua could recover, another system announcement entered his ears. This time, the system skipped the step of updating the task panel and directly used voice to send the message to Fong Bujua. How is this possible? Even with this extremely strange change, Brother Ju maintained a high level of alertness and thought quickly. Could it be that the Golden Foundation has used some kind of method to interfere with the system? Or this voice does not come from a system at all, but is a disguise used by the Golden Foundation? His hypothesis was quite plausible, but it was quickly rejected by him. There was a possibility that the voice was disguised, but the information that appeared in the player's menu, the Golden Foundation, could not have interfered with that. There were nano-machines in the coffee you drank. The next announcement was like a bolt of lightning that lit up Brother Ju's mind. At this moment, the visual signal received by your pupils and the auditory signal received by your eardrums have been synchronized. This F***cur. Fong Bujua started a curse in his mind. Hearing this, he understood instantly. His summoning of Musashi Kagane in the toilet, his use of the endless grenade box, and the fact that he had secretly given Musashi Kagane missions had all been exposed. But that was not the reason he was cursing. Fong Bujua's anger came from a sense of defeat, a feeling that he had not experienced before, the feeling of being one step behind. Of course, this did not mean that he was inferior to his opponent in terms of strategy or acting. The one step that Brother Ju was lacking had nothing to do with people. He did not lose in the game between people, but he lost in the knowledge and technology of this dimension that was several hundred years ahead of his own dimension. He was like a strategist who had transmigrated from ancient times to modern battlefields. Even though this strategist was many times more brilliant than the staff officers of the modern era in terms of strategy and tactics, he could still be easily defeated by a bug. The game menu and system announcement are sensed by brainwaves and cannot be detected. Now, please follow my instructions. Just as Fong Bujua was trying to understand the situation before him, the system of Thriller Paradise referred to itself as me and started to give him direct orders. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.